So my company's called American Eagle Gold. I like to tell people that we're Canada's most exciting porphyry discovery. I truly believe that we are. Proof's in the pudding. We start off with this slide. Quite frankly, it's a picture of our property. It's in beautiful BC. Infrastructure is very important, but as you can see, a lot of the area is clear cut, which helps with access, which is very important in the exploration and operation stage of the business. But anyone can say that you have the most exciting porphyry discovery. I like to work off facts, and I think facts are very important in our company because we are different than most properties, porphyry discoveries in BC, let alone the world. Now, if you look at our most recent drill hole that we had, which by the way, we ended our program on. It's always nice to end on a good note, and we're constantly learning. We had 302 meters of 1.09% copper equivalent. That's in British Columbia. That's within over 600 meters of almost 0.75% copper equivalent. That type of hole works in BC, it works in Chile, it works in the Arctic. So that's a fact. That's why I say we were Canada's most exciting copper gold porphyry discovery. But just know this, we're just beginning. This is just the start. And I'm going to explain to you why. So it's early days. Forward-looking statements. Caution about what you hear from me. So my issue right now, our company's issue, you might look at us and you're like, there's something wrong. Their market cap's too low. But it's a really tricky market right now. And I always compare our company to a tree in the forest. When it falls, is there anyone really around? So people just don't know about our story. I've called a lot of big investors, and they're slowly starting to learn about our story and trying to find an entry point. But when they look at us, they say, yeah, you really do have everything. And I believe we do. So what do you need when you have a big discovery, a big property that can eventually become a mine someday? And by the way, the goal is to prove that your property can be a mine. It's very unlikely we'll actually develop it. Someone else will probably buy us out and develop it. So you want to prove that you have a mine. And what do you need to do those? You need four real pillars. You need grade. You need scale, because you want this thing to run for a long, long time. If any big miner is going to buy it, they want to run it for 50 or 60 years. If copper goes up, copper goes down. So they want to make money when the market turns up. Location is very important. Your location can forgive some of your grade, because if you're in a good location, you have access to that location. It means cheaper operating costs and cheaper capital costs. You pay off your investment faster. Yeah, so the last thing we have, we're fully funded. So we're fully funded for a 2024 drill program. A lot of the time what you see companies end with good results and they sell off because people know that there's a private placement coming. I believe retail, for the most part, not as savvy on the geology side. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. It's science. You go to school for a long time for it, but retail and investors, for the most part, very savvy on the capital market side. So even if you end with good results, they'll see, you don't have enough money. They'll sell you off knowing that a private placement is coming. The key for us, we don't need a private placement. We're fully funded for a program bigger than we had last year. So grade, scale, location, fully funded. We have everything. It's great. It's blue sky ahead for us. I think a lot of investors right now, it's less about getting into a trade. It's more about entry position. So that last hole I was talking about, this is a visual of it. It's 2317. It's a beautiful hole. As I mentioned, it's beautiful anywhere. But, when you drill things that are outside the box, and our drill holes seem to be a little bit outside the box, a little bit unordinary, is that people aren't used to it. So they're a little confused. They scratch their heads. And what you're seeing with this drill hole, I always say it's a Chilean hole that we drilled in BC. And not just anywhere in BC, in central British Columbia Smithers, that you can drive a truck right onto the site. So just take a look at those two flags, look at that drill hole, and just remember there's more of this to come. We were just drilling on geophysics. Wait till you start drilling on geology. So again, I'm going to talk about the region where we are. The region is very important. Having a mining property, it's like real estate. What's the most important thing about real estate? It's location, location, and location. And where we are in the Badmean district, which is right central, it's in 85 kilometers away from Smithers, BC. Smithers, BC has about 11,000 people. You can drive an hour right onto our property. But the most important thing is a lot of people focus, northwest of us. It's a golden triangle where Red Chris is. But they mined the Bell and Grand Isle just right next to our property for 30 years, started in the late 60s, and they closed it up in 1992. Our region kind of went dormant. People forgot about it. They made the Red Chris discovery. People focused on the Golden Triangle. Gold Triangle is great, but it's really hard to access. It's awful weather. It snows a lot. Bell and Grand Isle, a lot better location, so we have a lot better starting point. The question is, do we have the scale and the grade? And it's starting to look like we do. So as you can see here how close we are. We have year-round access. We have the ability to drill 12 months a year. We're drilling within a clear cut, so our location is absolutely key. As you can see, we're one of the best places to drill, in Canada, let alone the world. So when people start looking at our property, they're kind of 2 years behind where I was when I first got introduced to the property. And I thought the best picture for this is an onion. There's an expression, you got to peel back the onion to really understand the story. Now, when I looked at this project, when it was introduced to us, I believe in August 2021 or 22, August 2021, I looked at the property and I said, yeah, it's located in a good location, but there's 6 different owners. They drilled almost 20,000 meters, and it didn't seem to work for the last company. So why am I going in there and drilling and spending shareholder money? And I said no to the property. And this property happened to be bird dogged and discovered or rediscovered, however you want, by a really talented geo. His name was Gary Artmont. He worked for 50 years, specialized in copper porphyry discoveries. In his mid to late 30s, he worked at a property called Grasberg. It's located in Indonesia. If you don't know what Grasberg is, it's owned by Freeport-McMoRan, and it is the biggest producer of gold in the entire world. But it's called a copper mine. That's how much copper they produce. It's an absolute beautiful mine. It's a huge money generator. And he was on the ground floor at the site in Borneo in Indonesia doing the original mapping at Grasberg. So he saw it from the very beginning. And he told me, he said, listen, Tony, I love you. He was my uncle. And he says, you're a bean counter, you're a CFA. He goes, I know geology. And he goes, it's all about your geophysics and your targets and he goes, don't worry, this is a big target. You have to get it. So he pretty much forced me to the table. And why he forced me to the table is, I took the 3 negatives that I had about it and I asked him about it. So the first negative I had about it was, there were 6 different companies on there before. None of them kind of moved it forward. And he said, Tony, name the 5, best properties out there right now. And I named them for him. And he named, 3 or 4 different companies that owned those before. He said, most great properties are getting discovered now. They've been owned by a bunch of different companies. So don't worry about that. Things change. And I said, well, Gary, there's 20,000 meters of drilling there before. How come they never hit before? So he showed me the map and he said, well, there's 20,000 meters of drilling. The average depth was 169 meters. If you look, there's cover between 20 and 50 meters. So technically they only went through 100 meters of mineralization. They scattered the property and all the different work they did. So he showed me, they did geophysics, they did IP, they did VTEM. But all the work that they did, a lot of it was on monologue, a lot of it was on paper. And when they went in, they worked in silos. And they pretty much only worked on the data sets that those particular companies worked on. So what Gary and his partner did, Steve McMullen, is they took all the different data sets, they put them together for the first time. He said, if there's one data set like this, he goes, I would drill. There's 5. You have to drill. He says a lot of things have changed. The average depth is only 165 meters, so you haven't touched the tip of the iceberg. He says also copper was 60 cents a pound back then, the last time they did major drilling in the mid-90s. Gold was $400 an ounce. The economics have completely changed. And by the way, technology has changed and a lot different deposits, porphyry deposits have been discovered. And if you look at Red Chris, that huge deposit really starts 600 to 800 meters underground. If you look at Escobal in Ecuador, that thing starts about 600 to 800 meters underground. And he says you have to drill deep. And even look at Filo, what's happening right now. They just came out with a great drill hole after tons of great drill holes. The mineralization of that really starts at about 370 meters. And I think there was one drill hole that they drilled a vertical depth of 370 meters in the history of our project. So he says, forget about historical drilling. Pretty much pretend they've never drilled it before. I said, okay, Gary. He said, the last thing I talked to you is access to site. The last time people had this property, you couldn't drive to site. You had to fly there by helicopter, but forestry moved in, and now you can access it by car. And that changes things up completely. Because instead of having to fly a helicopter, which costs you about $100,000 a hole, you can drive right up to it. So you save about 30% of your cost by just not having helicopter access. And he says now there's camps. So you save another about quarter of your cost by not having to build a camp there. We use the forestry camps, which we call the Holiday Inns of the Babine district. So anyways, we raised a little bit of money. We did a creative financing. And our plan for the very first year, 2022, was, we knew that there was a lot of mineralization at surface, a lot of smoke. But what we want to do was get the fire that fed that smoke up top. So we said, let's get down as fast as we can to that high grade that we thought was the feeder cell that was feeding everything. So Gary and Steve looked at the geophysics. They picked some targets, and we started off hole 2201. Our plan was to do 7 vertical holes. And then we started off 2201, a vertical hole. Our plan was to do about 800 to 900 meter holes. We hit 2201. And the plan was just to wait till we hit about 600 meters till hitting high grade. And I don't know what happened. And this hole was 130 meters from our closest caller. 2201 hit over 125 meters of 1.05% copper equivalent. Of that, it was about 0.3% copper, over 1 gram per ton gold. And at that point, we were like, holy shoot, we have something. Because nothing had been drilled that high grade, that close to surface. And that fence where you see 2201 is kind of skirting out west. And they hadn't drilled west of there. So we're kind of in a new district there. And Gary always said, he goes, assays are great, but he goes, I've been in the business so long, I'll be able to see by the core if I'm right about my thesis. And as soon as I remember this, as soon as we started hitting our cores, August 2022, Gary called me. He was living in Ecuador, and he said, I was right. Like, this is really going to be something. And our stock was 3 cents at the time. Gary sadly passed away 2 weeks later of a heart attack in Ecuador. So he was actually never able to see our assays, but, between our site and our team, I believe Gary's kind of looking up. And there's a big reason why I think this company is doing successful. It's a mix of all these different ingredients. So anyways, we drilled 2202, and instead of doing a vertical hole, we want to kind of chase the high grade. So we drilled it north, and we hit over 300 meters of over 0.6% copper equivalent, another great hole. And that was coming from surface again. And then we kept on drilling, and 2204 was another great hole, over 500 meters of almost 0.5% copper equivalent. So we knew we had high grade. The problem was, and this is the thing about Charlie Greig. So we hired a geological team. The leader was Charlie Greig. Charlie is the guy that put together and was a head geo for a company called GT Gold. Within 3 years, they were able to do their first drill hole, and they sold to Newmont Mining for over $400 million. He's got a lot of experience in the BC area. Anyways, Charlie wasn't too involved from the beginning, and I'll fast forward. He's literally logging core right now, really believes in it. Anyways, what he told us was, you got to start doing incline holes, but we stuck to our plan, and we drilled along a fence, and 4 of our 7 holes were vertical, and 2 of those 7 were north-south along that very narrow fence. We only did 1 incline hole, and it was collared probably a little bit too far east into the Babine stock. But we drilled a good enough hole there on the first hole that we actually got contacted by 4 different companies, major companies, 4 of the biggest base metal companies in the world, and 2 of those companies got in our data room. And Teck was particularly interested because Teck is a BC company. It's right in their backyard. They're familiar with these type of deposits, and they worked in our data room for 6 months. They came to site. They met with the local community. And when we were looking for funding, they actually came to the table in May 2023, and they did an investment in our company. They took about 14% of us, and that gave us our funding for the 2023 program. Problem with our 2023 program, as I'm going to show you, we only had shallow historical drill holes from before we got there, and our drill holes we had from 2022, again, 4 of the 7 were vertical, and the 2 of the other 7 were north-south. They're all within a very narrow fence. So there's still very little geometry to work on and very little geology to work on because all those holes are very close together. But we had Teck's money, and we had some faith, so we're going to start drilling. So this is this year's drilling program, or 2023. Our first hole was 2308. And we want to kind of maybe do a layup hole, hit some more high grade, similar to what we hit with 2201 and 2202. And what happened was really interesting. And this was the big aha moment for me at the company. I still wasn't sure after our first year of drilling. After that 2308, I was pretty sure that we had something, because what happens, we drilled from surface 775 meters of 0.5% copper equivalent from surface. And that's pretty much mineable anywhere in the world, let alone BC. And I thought to myself, we have more than that, like we're off to the races. It's all about finding a high grade pocket of copper equivalent, paying off your initial capital, and then you could have mined 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, throughout the end of time. If you look at Highland Valley, that's what they're doing. They're mining 0.25% copper equivalent there in BC. So yeah, our drill holes this year were a little bit different. So all of them were inclines. We said, Charlie, you're a talented guy. We're gonna make sure you have some geometry and geology to base 2024 drilling program off. And we just hit good grade after good grade. So 2311 was 475 meters of 0.65% copper equivalent. 2308 was 800 meters of 0.4% copper equivalent. We had another great hole in 2312 was 900 meters of 0.5% copper equivalent. So we just kept on hitting great things after great things. So we did a little bit of IP midway through the season, and that IP actually wasn't available to us, unfortunately, until our very last drill hole. So in our last drill hole, we said, let's drill a good hole. So we actually based it on our IP. And 2317, again, was right out of the park. It was 302 meters of 1.09% copper equivalent, 600 meters of 0.75% copper equivalent. And what we see here in that bottom square is a nice pocket of high-grade copper and gold, which, by the way, is open completely north, going over 2312 and 2204. So we think that those zones connect. And if those zones connect, well, the whole property around that Babine porphyry stock can be mined and processed. So people started to take notice for us on hole 2317. But what you have to realize, which is a little disappointing for me, again, I talk about a tree falling in the forest, you really need a big tree to wake up the neighbors that might not necessarily be close by. But that last hole we had wasn't our best hole. 7 of our other holes would be deemed, high grade in BC, and you can see those, they're circled by red. But every single one of our holes would be mined. Our worst hole is about 800 meters of 0.22% copper equivalent, which, by the way, if you had that high grade pocket that we had, well, that's mineable. So we had a lot of great holes. Every single hole we hit on. And Charlie always says, listen, you can hit on 5 of 17, but if you hit 17 of 17, you can only be lucky so much. And, luck's a big part of it. But luck's allowed us to have the capital to keep on drilling. And in the end, the key is we have a really great potential deposit and great property. And that's the difference. And if you look at our property compared to Bell and Granite essentially were 2 potted deposits. They drilled mine for 30 years. They fit very small within our property. So our property is very big in terms of size of the mineralization. People love to have district scale properties, but those are great if you don't have targets, you don't know where the heat is, and we know where the heat is. So within our 4 by 5 kilometer size stamp of a property, all the heat, all the mineralization is almost slap dab in the middle, which is absolutely perfect. So just highlighting some of our holes. So as you can see, 2308 and 2311, those are good high-grade holes. But the fear was, we might be drilling down a narrow mineralized corridor. So what we wanted to do was we want to step out west. So 2317, as I'll show you later. So 2317, I'll show you right here. 2317 is a step out west, about 250 meters. 250 meters away from any historical drill hole. So we actually drilled across 2311, 2308, and what we discovered is that we didn't drill down a narrow corridor before. We actually drilled across a really big, wide envelope. And if you look at that envelope now, it's about 300 meters horizontal, 400 meters vertical, and right now about 120 meters step out as a plan view. And then 2312, I talked about that earlier. That was a fantastic hole, 900 meters of 0.5% copper equivalent. You go almost 1% copper equivalent near the top. And as you can see from the next slide, these are all our really high-grade holes. And Charlie has been working like a dog with his dog, doing all the logging, because he said, we got to make sure this geology kind of links up. We have enough holes in the south that we're starting to link up the geology. And what he told me, and you'll be able to hear from him soon, is that the geology in the south, the rocks, they match the rocks in the north. So if you almost look at it as a tunnel, you can actually join that tunnel underground all the way at 2312 and 2204, which is very exciting. And if that high grade continues, you have a massive, massive scale of high grade copper and gold. Now, people always ask about Teck Resources. Teck did three investments with us last year. And as I mentioned, they did the second investment with us because I wanted to make sure if we ended on a really good drill hole, we weren't stuck. We weren't stuck having to raise money because, capital markets are pretty savvy. But Teck doesn't ask us for a lot. People always ask us, but they said, listen, we're really good operators. We're really good at building, but, we want to focus on that. And he said, we didn't just hire you because of the property. We hired you because you have Charlie Greig and his team were part of the GT Gold and some of the best exploration geologists in BC, let alone the world. So what they say is, we want you to do one thing, though. One thing. We know you have scale, but we want to know if you have world-class scale. And that's a big word, world-class. So he said, do a step out into that area that is 650 to 750 meters away from any historical drill hole ever in the region. Just drill there and see if you have something. So, we had a helicopter access, and we were able to parlay it with another company that was nearby. So we actually drilled it a little bit early, and I call it a bit of a drunk hole. It's kind of based off geophysics, but no drilling nearby. And we drilled it, and by golly, we hit almost 120 meters of 0.4% copper equivalent from surface. Very similar rocks to what we see west of us. And, it's 435 meters of 0.25% copper equivalent. And that's great. It shows that there's smoke in that area, similar rocks. As we kind of learn later on in the season, we probably drilled this in the wrong way. So how do we have the information that we had later on? We probably would have drilled 2309 a little bit differently and would have probably returned a lot higher grade. But you got to take advantage of the infrastructure when you have it, and we just drilled it then. But yeah, that's an absolutely amazing hole, considering it was a blind drill hole. If you walk on any property, just drill a hole in the ground, you wouldn't be expecting to hit that. So where there's smoke, there's fire, and we'll be able to parlay this eventually and hopefully connect it over there in the west. So Teck was extremely happy about that drill hole. And look, it's just open everywhere. This is probably the most important slide to show you. So 2317, as I mentioned, is the first drill hole we drilled off new geophysics, new IP. And the IP that we drilled off before was 30 years old. It only went about 150 meters deep. And this IP we had went about 400 meters deep. And what we noticed is the high grade that we were hitting in 2311 and 2308 went through a shoulder, an IP chargeability shoulder. And chargeability shoulder is essentially where, you're transitioning from high to low chargeability. So we said, let's try and drill down that shoulder to see if it actually does return high grade. So we drilled down that shoulder with 2317. And that's where we hit the high grade. So the geophysics was actually lining up with the geology and the assays, which, geophysics, you can call it junk science. Some people like it, some people don't. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But this time it seems to be really lining up. So it's giving us a really good targeting tool. Unfortunately, it was our last hole, but, it was really, really encouraging. Now, what's encouraging, if you see that kind of light pink to dark red transition, that's the IP shoulder. So now interpretate this. That IP shoulder technically is high grade, and it wraps all the way around, all the way to surface. So if we step at about 400 meters to the west, that's about the surface of this IP shoulder. And theoretically, this high grade comes right to surface. For us, it started about 98 meters underground, but it could start to surface and wrap all the way around, which gives you a nice pocket of high grade. And this just isn't a slice. This high grade pushes through the screen all the way north and wraps around the whole Babine porphyry stock. So you technically have a nice big inner tube of high grade around this whole property, which is absolutely phenomenal. Now, the real kicker you have to look at. So if you look at this picture on the left, you can see the IP shoulder where the green and the blue is. This is completely symmetrical over to the east where we drilled 2309. As you can see, 2309 was just drilled a little bit in the wrong direction. If we drill down the shoulder, which we're going to focus on next year towards the beginning of the season, we could possibly hit some really high grade over there to the east. And if we do that, that's what you call $100 billion drill hole, and you prove out this whole thesis. So this is guys really excited. We can't wait to get out there and start drilling in 2024, which, by the way, we're fully funded for. I use this slide at the Metal Investor Forum. I think it's a good one because it's a question I get asked all the time. What keeps me up at night? So the things that you think that would keep me up at night, First Nations relations, are we going to hit great drill holes? Do we have enough money? Those are things that don't keep me up at night. I'm not worried about. What worries me is I have a lot of faith in this property. I'm 2 years ahead of everyone else here. I do believe in it. I believe that we will get to the finish line with this. The finish line, for us, we're not the Lundins. We don't have billions of dollars, so we probably can't hold on to a property until it's $3 or $4 billion. I want to, but I don't know if we can, because I think the Lundins probably will build it with BHP or something. But, for me, it's after next year's program, which could be a huge transitional year, how do we start hitting all of the blue sky before some company comes knocking at our door with a really enticing offer? And you see right here, this is kind of the inner tube that I was talking about that wraps around this Babine porphyry stock. Remember, this is all theoretical, but so far it has worked. So how do we start hitting all these question marks and start unlocking value? That's the question. So that's what keeps me up at night. I want to be able to do that smart without, selling that many shares. So it's all about getting our stock up. But I believe if we drill there, we'll really get some great results. Now, forget about this inner tube. There's huge mineralization at surface here. And the rock that the mineralization is in right now, you call it country rock, those usually aren't associated with core. And core is where the high grade usually comes from. So where is this feeder rock? Where is this core coming from? So next year when we do our drilling, we hope to find it, hope to start to understand where it is a little bit better. So it either comes deep underground or it's laterally hidden among our property. So we're hoping to find it. And that's another really big question mark, another big way to unlock value on our property. So just a quick highlight of what we're going to do next year. We have a minimum 10,000 meter program. We can go to a maximum 20,000 meter program. We'd like to bring 2 rigs onto the property. But, next year it's just about being disciplined, doing a drill grid north to south, and just drilling across the property. So we wanted to find the scale, get to potentially doing a back of the envelope resource calculation. But the big thing too is just connecting the south to the north. We're changing from doing, scout exploration, trying to find the high grade. We know the high grade's there, and now it's about connecting it. So it's about showing the continuity and just understand the geology. And as you understand the geology throughout the year, you can, vector in your holes a little bit better, try and really get that grand slam, that super high grade somewhere. So we're going to build that big square, build out that main area of interest, and then build out over there to the east where 2309 is. And if we start to show that, and those are all hitting, well, our thesis that it wraps around that whole Babine porphyry stock is still in place. So eventually we'll go there as well. But, we're a junior company. We're working within a budget, and we will get there. But next year, I'm telling you right now, it's going to be a transitional year, and it's really different. We're not selling off. People are looking for an entry point. So our cap structure is important. We have 109 million shares outstanding, with our warrants and option about 129. People are working through our warrants right now. Our share price is around 41 to 43 cents, $45 million market cap. The important thing is we have cash and we have warrants getting exercised every day, which is great. So our cash is building, and, we're hoping that we can get some sort of, investment from Teck to match, which will give us our full funding for the 20,000 meter program. So we don't even technically have to go to market. Of those shares we have outstanding, about 65% are closely held between insiders, funds, and Teck resources. So within 3 to 5 phone calls, we can track down about 2/3 of our outstanding shares, which is really important. So again, talking about Teck, they invested in us 3 times. They invested in us May to do us that initial investment. They invested in us August to make sure we were funded for next year. So our stock didn't go in the toilet. People think that we're going to do a private placement. And the other thing they did is they invested us in November. So That was a strategic move. We sold part of our option to a sister company to get our original funding to drill there a couple of years ago, and we bought it back. And the reason why we bought it back when we did was we want to remind people that Teck was still interested in our property while we're waiting for assays. But also, more importantly, Charlie Greig, who you're going to hear from, he's part of GT Gold fame. He's a celebrity in BC. You can't walk down the streets of Vancouver without him shaking 30 people's hands. But it gave him an opportunity to invest. And it's all about credibility. In this market, especially in a bad market, people feel like they're in an avalanche. And when you're in an avalanche, you don't know whether you're facing up or down. And it's the same thing in the junior mining business. People don't know who's lying to them, who's telling the truth. So it's all about people putting skin in the game and people showing that this property does have credibility. So from these 3 different investments at Teck, obviously it shows we have credibility, but Charlie actually putting in $250,000 of his own cash into a deal that had no discount and no warrants attached to it really showed that he had belief in it. And that $250,000 of Charlie's wealth, even Charlie has done quite well, is a lot. It's a lot bigger chunk of Charlie's wealth than the investment that Teck made in this compared to how much cash that they have in the bank. So that really brought a lot more attention to us. So all these little moves we do are strategic. When I do dilution events, I like to do something I call dilution but by not diluting, which is essentially diluting your shares by issuing more shares, but they go into really safe hands, and they go into hands of people like Teck Resources that I believe that they're not in the junior penny stock business. They're into building mines business, and they've identified us as a company that could potentially have a mine that they can build. So they're holding us to us for the long term, so they can have a toehold and eventually, maybe buy us out. So those shares aren't going to be traded. So you're not worried about 20% of the shares diluted to start going out there and causing a downward shift in the market. So that's what my focus is. What keeps me up at night, as well as being able to hit everything, is to make sure that we minimize dilution. Our equity is our currency that helps us unlock value and it helps us to grow. And that's what I focus on every single day. I always get asked about catalysts. So what are catalysts in the next 3 or 4 months? People get so worried. They say, well, you're not going to be drilling. So there's no catalyst. So people are going to sell off on your shares. Wake up and smell the coffee. This property is different than pretty much any other junior property in BC. So what we're seeing right now is people aren't selling us off. People are coming in for entry points. I always ask people, it's like, why is the focus to double up on your losers and then sell your winners? What you should be doing is doubling up on your winners and selling your losers. It's all about progression. If you've seen the progression with our company, we're up 400% on the year. We started last year, our best drill hole was over 900 meters of 0.37%. This year is 600 meters of 0.74%. So, it's all about progression. Have faith in us. We're doing pretty well so far. And, again, talking about the winners and losers, don't try and catch a fallen knife. Hitchhike to a shooting star. I believe we are that shooting star. As you can see by our price action, we're flattening out. People are looking for entry points. So what I always say, I had a geologist come by my office the other day, and he grabbed me by the arm, and he said, Tony, I think you actually have a mine. I go, people just don't understand that. He goes, but what I understand from my 40 years in the business is you guys drilled on geophysics, and that's somewhat lucky. He goes, now with Charlie on your team, you guys will be able to drill on geology, and that's a big difference. So don't think of that 300 meters of over 1% as a ceiling. I think it's potentially the floor for next season. So I'm very excited. We're going to let our geologists do the proper work. Every single drill hole you put in the ground is the price of a Ferrari, is the price of a Lamborghini. And the last I checked, I don't go bring my Lamborghini that I don't have over to a cliff and drive it into the water. So that's why we don't want to just put 350,000 frivolous drill holes into the ground, without knowing 100% of our science. So we want to make sure we maximize the chance of success. And by the way, the only people that want you to drill right now are people that don't understand the project, don't understand mining, and they're traders. And we're getting away from fast money. We're getting into investors that want to hold this long-term, strong hands. And I was just in Vancouver. People that I met, they're real hitters. They're real long-term investors that have made billions of dollars before in these things, and they've seen it. They lent me a lot of advice, but I couldn't believe some of these heads that turn. So I'm seeing a lot different investors get into our story. So I just tell people, enjoy the ride. Now, the next big catalyst, From first drill hole to production, it takes anywhere between 10 and 20 years. So again, coming back to drilling, why am I going to fast track when I'm worried about my capital and my dilution, start putting Lamborghinis into the ground when I don't know? Why don't I just wait an extra 3 months when it takes 15 years to get from first drill hole to production? 3 months within 15 years is such a small period of time. And what I don't want to act like is a minor league hockey player who passes the puck the moment it gets on a stick. You got to be patient. You got to hold on to it. You got to look like Cale Makar, Peter Forsberg. Hold on to that. Be patient. Let the market speak for itself, and you drill the very best drill holes you can. And by the way, we're going to start drilling in May. It's going to be spring before you know it. So in 2 or 3 months, we'll be drilling, and that's another huge catalyst coming out. And then we got assays all the way throughout the year. Based on how the year goes, we might just drill all the way through the winter and drill 12 months a year. So we're keeping our options open, but it's all about our cost of capital and the price of our equity. So, people always want to ask me about comps. There really is no other comp for us in British Columbia. If you look at any of those other geners, maybe some of the properties in Golden Triangle, but we have a lot better infrastructure than those properties in the Golden Triangle. Most of those Golden Triangle properties, the good ones, are tied up by majors, Newmont and Newcrest. But I look at, 2 other plays right now. And before everyone gets all excited, I'm not saying we're Hercules Silver. I'm not saying we're Philo, but I'm just looking at valuation. I'm just showing investors what price discovery can do and what the opportunities are. Hercules Silver is around between 180 and 200 million dollars. So, they're 4 to 5 times the size of us. If you compare us to Hercules Silver, look, Chris Paul, great guy, great property, located in Idaho, another safe jurisdiction. We're in BC. BC has a lot better history of copper mining. Their drill hole is a little higher grade than ours, but ours is over a lot wider intercept, and it was followed by a lot better other drill holes. I think the Idaho thing is a little bit more unknown. People like the unknown. It creates upside that they've never seen before. And, ours is a little bit different. People have drilled in BC a lot, so people are kind of putting us in, the different boxes of these other companies. But I think we're a lot more similar to Idaho than we are. It's Idaho play than we are to the other BC play. So they have 180 million almost as a floor of a valuation. Philo, $2.8 billion. Philo is probably the top 3 discoveries ever made. It's pretty much the size of Escondida. It's massive, but that shows you the value. And the one thing we have that Philo doesn't have is, we're not located on the top of the Andes, and our mineralization doesn't start, 300-400 meters underground. Not saying we're Philo. Philo is the best discovery they made in the last 10 to 20 years. I'm just trying to show the delta of valuation. So there is a big delta there. There's a lot of room for price discovery. We're very excited. If you want to look at floor valuation, look no further than the property that completely surrounds us. It's called Amark. It's a Duke property. Boliden's invested $70 million or planned to around our property. And, I don't think they've had a drill hole close to what we've had. So just look at $70 million. That's still more than the $45 million that we're valued for right now. And what I always said is, they invested for France, but didn't include Paris in the deal. If you look at this whole Babine camp, we do have Paris. We have the best target. It's some of the best infrastructure in the entire city. So, come along for the ride, but talk to your geologist, talk to your investment advisor, and listen to what Charlie and Neil have to say, because they're the conservative side. And if you look at them, they're really excited too. So I brought this up at MIF. I'm going to do it again. One of my favorite movies is Empire Strikes Back. That's Lando Calrissian. That's Han Solo. And Han Solo just got frozen in carbonite. And people in the world are so short-sighted. They focus on quarterly results. What's going to happen to your next drill hole? And they don't look at the big picture. And then who are the most successful, strategic people in the world? They're the people, it's the Chinese, it's the Japanese. And what they do is they have 10, 20, 30, 50-year plans. I'm not trying to do this. But what I want to tell investors is look at our progression so far. We've brought the stock from 3 cents to 40 cents. We're up 400% on the year. Stay with me. What I want to do is I want to put you all in a coma. I want to put you all in carbonite like Han Solo did. I don't want to wake you up in 2 years. I want to bring you to where I think we can go. But a lot of investors, they get really nervous. They want to trade out of winners. But close your eyes, hold on the stock for a couple of years, and see where we can go. We're going to bring you to a really, really good place. So that's why I end on this slide. I think it's really, really important. Again, I want to focus on the fact that we drill in geophysics, not in geology. And this is the first year we're going to drill in geology. So I'm really hoping that we have a lot more Chilean holes to come. I can be contacted anytime. We're looking for really good, strong investors. That's our website. Our symbol's AE. We're trading on the TSX Venture. And we're good, honest people. We got a great property and a great team. Napoleon always said it's better to have a lucky army than a good army. We're lucky that we have a lucky army and a good army. And it's still early days, and 2024 is going to be a really exciting year. Thank you very much.
Could you kind of take a step back and tell us about your career and your background prior to American Eagle?
Yeah, business background, traveled for a couple of years, needed another degree, did my CFA. I kind of fell ass backwards in mining. I mentioned my uncle who passed away. It's him and my dad that kind of influenced me to get in mining. My dad really loved my uncle, even though it wasn't his brother. It's his brother-in-law. And we saw my uncle, whenever he came back from Indonesia or Africa or whatnot. And it really influenced my dad, all this junior mining market, because after Freeport, he got in the junior mining business. So my dad was obsessed with junior mining stocks, got me kind of obsessed with it, and got me kind of interested in mining. And then, talking to my uncle all the time, like just seeing what he had done, where he had traveled. And when I finished my CFA, I was looking for something long-term. I was done kind of the traveling thing. And I was looking for a job at the bank with the CFA, obviously. And my uncle said, work for a mining company. And he said, you get to travel the world. You get to see the world. You get to help the world. And he goes, if you got to be working, Tony, he goes, better be working like an industry alike with people you enjoy working with. And it's been very true. Like people in the mining business are good people. They're fun people. You have crazy stories. I've been to a bunch of different countries, and that's kind of how I got into mining. So what I did is I made a list of the top 10 companies I invested in. And I found a company called Iron Gold. They were just opening up the Rosebell mine. I was making some money trading it. And I cold called the CEO. For some reason, I got into his office, brought him a coffee. We hit it off. He hired me on the spot. And I started from just getting him coffee and doing kind of basic intern IR that got sent to site for a year in Suriname, learned the operations side of the business. And then, did corporate development, did innovation, and I did some institutional sales with him. So I traveled the world with him and met with investors. So that's where I kind of really started to understand investors. He taught me a lot about public speaking and stuff. He said, always tell a story. People have pretty much no attention span. You lose about 10% of your listeners every minute. So make sure you start off with a bang and you tell a story to kind of keep them hanging on. Because the big difference is people just knowing who we are. So that when I do those pictures and stuff, it's not to be a comedian. It's just so they remember me. If they remember me, they'll remember the company. And maybe when they're looking to buy a stock, then maybe they'll remember AE. So that's kind of how I got involved in the business. After 10 years, you work at those big companies. They're a lot of fun. They have great culture, like company events and stuff. But I thought I had talents to take me to other places. It just wasn't with Iron Gold. There's a lot of glass ceilings there. You got a lot of lifers, and it's a great company. So a lot of people do stay there. I don't blame them. So I kind of want to do something else. And I met a guy named Steve Stewart, who's now our chairman of our company. And he asked me to join his group. He said the big difference between, anybody leading these junior companies, really it's about communication. He says, you have good communication. So he asked me to join. So he said, join my group, kind of intern, float around, learn the junior mining business. He goes, it's not rocket science, but give you a year to learn about it. And Gorm, day 3 came to my office, and he's like, we're firing so-and-so. The company that's going to go public. It was American Eagle. And he said, you got an interview with Crux tomorrow. You got to talk about the property. And I wasn't even focused on American Eagle, so I was extremely nervous. But sometimes the best way is baptism by fire. So he just threw me into the fire, essentially. We learned some stuff along the way, and it's been a really good experience. And met a lot of good people. It's all about trials and tribulations. A lot of times you fail 5 or 6 times before you hit something. Like we pretty much hit it right off the bat. I always work by the fact if you're yourself and you're honest with investors, people you work with, kind of everything else follows. You do good work, you're good to people, then success follows that. And I found that's kind of worked. And we found Charlie Greig. My uncle is obviously involved. And through Charlie Greig, we found other really great partners. We work really well with the First Nations community and, really well with investors. So we just want sticky people. We want sticky investors, sticky employees, We want to build a family, build a story, and, eventually get to a liquidity event, gain real trusted shareholders, and maybe even do it again down the line.
Excellent.
That's a history.
We always like to ask this, and you told us about Charlie investing recently. How much of your own personal net wealth would you say is invested with American Eagle, approximately?
Personal net worth?
Yeah.
100,000.
So I take it you have options and stuff like this too?
I have options too. It's a heavy question. Look, I got 2 kids, relatively young, married, paying for a house in Toronto, big mortgage. So $100,000 is a huge chunk of my investment. And probably in terms of my investments, it's 75% of my portfolio, to be honest. And options is another thing. People think you don't pay for, you don't pay for options, so you don't have skin in the game. But what you got to realize, I joined this mining business for the upside. So the salary I'm taking home versus what I'd be getting right now at one of these majors is probably less than half. So those options you have is part of your salary package. So that's a big part of your wealth. So I don't think people quite realize that. They look at it when the company goes through the roof and you make all this money, but they don't look at it for the other, 100 times when CEOs, the company goes to zero and you don't get anything. So huge part of my wealth is tied to American Eagle. But I really do believe in it, and I believed in it for 2 years now. Just hoping that a lot of other people start to. And I've noticed some investors come in, big time investors. I'll tell you a story. So we had a really big player in Vancouver. He's not the top mining investor; he's the second top mining investor in BC. And he called me up and he said, invested 1 million shares in the market today when I saw that drill hole. He says, I'm going to invest a couple more million. I could get to the point where I get to 10%. He goes, I love the story. It's long-term. He compared, he goes, it's different than any other BC story. And he goes, when BC porphyries work, he goes, they run and they work. He goes, I'm excited. He goes, I want your technical guys to sit with my technical guys. So we went to one of the restaurants in Vancouver, a really nice one. We sat around this big round table. This guy's known by everybody. And I sat next to him and we just kind of networked. We shot the shit. I'm not a geo. He's not a geo. And what he did, he goes, watch these guys. So our geos sat next to his technical guys, and he had them kind of walk through almost like an interview. And one of the technical guys that came in, like he runs $1 billion company. So like that's how big this investor is. He's getting the guy that runs $1 billion company to be his technical guy. And I was just watching his face. He tapped me on the shoulder. He goes, look at his face. And the guy was slowly smiling, and he understood the property. And I looked over at so-and-so, and he looked at me, and I could see the tide changing with him, and I could extrapolate with the tide changing with the investors. And then sure enough, another technical guy came in, and the same thing happened. And those are the type of meetings that we have. They're family offices, they're big funds, guys that are getting into a position and no longer worried about buying it for 38 cents, 44 cents, trying to save a couple pennies. Because they do believe in it, and they're saying we're not going to start trading of it for Chilean play. This is one of our top core junior plays that we're going to hold on to it for 1 or 2 years. And those are investors we have, and those are the meetings I'm having this year versus last year, which is just scrounging to get people to buy it.
So when we look at your largest shareholders, Teck is obviously the largest one, but if you look at the other 46% or so that was tightly held, can you break that down? Who are the other large shareholders of the company currently?
Orefiners are sister company, so we spun out of Orefiners. They also did that kind of exotic financing with us where they got some shares instead of cash. So they own around 10% of the shares outstanding. Steve Stewart, our chairman, owns around 10%. There's a couple other founders, involved with putting together originally. They combined own around 10%. And then, from a few of our private placements, I was actually just looking at the share structure last night. I could count about 5 different funds that own 15%. So you add all that up, you get about 65% of shares outstanding. And the rest are guys kind of trading in and out of the stock. I think what I've seen recently is this high volume has really helped us. When we see a lot of volume, and you see the shares trading up to 51 cents, that means you're getting out of the old shareholders, which we liked, but they got in at lower bases, either between 3 cents and 30 cents. So they took their profits, and more people are coming in, in the 38 to 50 cent range. So they're creating a new floor. So we're seeing a lot more people coming into the play.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Obviously, that becomes as you're still a small cap, but that starts to change probably inevitably.
The one thing people, you got to jump into the brain of the average investor, and the brain of the average investor, what they look at, they don't look at market cap, they don't look at comparables. That's why I brought up the comparable of Philo and Hercules to show where we could be. Again, not saying we're going to be Philo. I know there's a lot of Philo fans out there, but what people look at mentally is they look at where you came from, and they think there's fear of missing out. Then there's the thought that you did miss out. We're not a FOMO company. We're a thought that you did miss out company, because we came from 3 cents. We're trading at 43 cents right now. A 12x, 14x. So people think that they missed the boat, but we came from almost nothing. I think our market cap was $2 million. So I think we're transitioning now away from people that thought they missed out to now to people that have the fear of missing out. And that's a real fear people should have if we actually have what we think we have.
So Teck, they have been a passive investor so far, to my understanding. Will they provide any technical assistance, or maybe you don't need it, but do they provide any other resources to you guys to drive this forward as a very large shareholder?
Yeah, for the drill program, they let us kind of do our thing. We show them what the drill plan was, and they're like, "You guys know the rocks better than anyone, and we'll leave it with you." But the off-season work, they're helping out a lot, and we especially noticed that after our drill program ended, a lot more active. Answer any of our calls and kind of helping out with the stuff that they do internally. Age dating, stuff like that, genochronology, and then doing some other technical work that Charlie and Neil defer to them to kind of explain. But the off-season work, the connecting the geology, that's kind of where they come in handy, and they got a lot of manpower, and that's where they're kind of stepping in, because I'm not going to speak for them, but I think that they've kind of got over that hump too, that believe that we do have something. So letting some of their resources to us to help us target the best we can in 2024 kind of is of their best interest as well.
And then it will be interesting for people who don't know Ore Group. Could you briefly tell us about who Ore Group is, and how they will play with American Eagle going forward? Will they be active, or are they just passive investors? How does that work?
Ore Group's a private company, almost like an umbrella name, and it's run by Steve Stewart, friend of mine, runs YMP with me, Young Mining Professionals. That's how I got to know him. And pretty much the philosophy is, it starts with 2 main pillars. It's good people, and it's 3 pillars: good people, good jurisdiction, and metals that will kind of stand the test of time. So you're looking at copper, gold, uranium for the most part. So all of our properties, except for one, are located in Canada safe jurisdictions. Because, Gorm, this whole thing with Panama, like, it threw me off, and it changed everything for me. And I don't think people quite understand the significance of it. Panama was deemed as the safest third world country in the world, pretty much. And if they take away their mines and stop 1% of half the copper going to market, well, every other country, so Australia, Canada, the US, it is off. So Congo, could they change? Maybe. Could they take away all their copper? Maybe. Could Indonesia? Maybe. Any country in South America with those geopolitical regimes, I have no faith in them. So that's changed everything for us, and that's why we focus on Canada, because if you're going to spend those years and that capital to build a mine, it better not get taken away. And Canada might take a little bit longer for the permitting, but it's for a good reason. And once you have a mine, it pretty much lasts forever. So that's key. So people, metal, location. So that's what we're kind of focused on. They run all these different companies. The reason why we're kind of sisters with Ore Finders is we got spun out of them. So that's why they still have, shareholding of us. And now Ore Finders is called Ore Cap, and they're essentially transitioned from an exploration company to a fund. So they hold percentages of different companies, us being one of them. But, the main advantage of the Ore Group is that we share people. If you want to create value in this business, you can only promote so much. It comes down to drill holes and the team and your geological team. So I'm the only full-time employee at my company that the company is paying for. Most of the money should go into the ground, should be going into making a discovery. So we share the people within the Ore Group. the hidden secret on the street is if you see a company with one CFO and they're a junior, like that's a waste of money. So we share resources across the board. So we have a really talented CFO that we would never be able to afford. I worked with them at IM Gold, super talented guy. His name's Joel Friedman, could be working any major, probably be a CFO. And he gets paid pretty well, but he gets paid from 6-7 different companies. So, we probably pay him $30,000-$40,000 a year, which, by the way, if you take that from a $250,000 salary, that's an extra $200,000 a year that we can put in the ground, which essentially is another drill hole, which could be the difference between making hole 2317 and not making hole 2317. Same goes for our accounts payable, our legal, etc., our rent in our office. So we split those costs across all those different companies and probably save ourselves about $1 million a year. So that's kind of what the org group's all about.
That's great. The outstanding warrants, about 20 million. Maybe that's not updated, but about 20 million. What's the deadline for those warrants being exercised, and what's the exercise price average?
Yeah, so it's 20 million warrants and options. So of those warrants and options, about 13 million are warrants, about 7 million are options. Those options, there's a rule at our company, maybe not at all companies, but nobody, if you're attached to the company, nobody sells them. You come in our company, you stay in there for the long ride, or you don't exercise your options. So pretend those don't even exist. Now the warrants, those do exist. So if you want to talk about warrants, we have about 13 million warrants out there. I would say about those, I think there's around 8 million that, probably 7 million now that are at 30 cents, and they're due May 2024, so in 3 or 4 months. And then the rest of them are due in January next year. So those are attached to financings. I hate warrants. They create an overhang. We actually extended our warrants last year because our stock was at 8 cents. We want to keep some of our main shareholders in the play. We want to show that we're, friendly owners of companies, but I'm going to fight tooth and nail moving forward if there's any financing to not include warrants in the deal, because they just kill you. They're good for free financing. Last year, if you told me we'd be trading at 40 cents, I'd be happy, so I would take the warrants, but maybe I'm just a greedy individual. They do create free financings. On the back of that, you can get top-ups from Teck, which creates another catalyst. But I promise you, I'm going to try my best not to have warrants going forward, and hopefully don't want it, because the next investment is either going to come from Teck or another corporate. But also, if you want to look at something, look at warrants. So even if we're exercised at 30 cents, usually those raises were associated with 7% disc, so 7% broker fees, 7% warrants, and a 15% discount. So a 30 cent warrant financing can kind of be interpreted as like a 42 cent financing if you kind of backwards in those numbers. If you're staying with me, maybe it's all in my head. So that's how all the warrants break down. We're rolling through them. I'm seeing them get it exercised every day. It's fun working for a company, a junior company that's usually scrounging for money, to see their balance sheet, increase every day, and the share price also increase. It's a bit of an anomaly, but it kind of shows the strength of our project.
So if we just summarize, if we look at the budget before we move to the kind of the work plan and break down the budget for the year, as you can see it now, the cash on hand plus the warrants that will expire in May and top-ups from Teck, what do you think you'll be able to get in terms of a cash position before initiating your drilling this year?
Well, first of all, I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch. I don't want to speak for Teck. I'm a glass half full guy, so I hope they top up. So they have not committed anything to us. They're not necessarily going to do it. But blue sky. We have 5 million right now and growing. We can get to between $8 and $10 million, by May, if all things work well and everything aligns. And so far it is aligning. So that will more than cover our drilling for this year. So our drilling right now, so we have 5 million in the bank, 4 million we have earmarked for exploration. Of that, about 3.3 is flow through dollars. We'll take 700,000 of our hard dollars and also put it towards the drilling. So $4 million gives you about 10,000 meters of drilling. So that's what we're going to do. What people have to realize, BC gives you a nice little tax credit when you drill in hard dollars. So, even when you go to flow through, you get about 60% premium on the dollars that you invest. But in BC, that's they give you 30 cents back for every dollar you spend. So, looking at the top of that, that's a 42% premium on every dollar. So It's not that much bit more of a delta between flow through and just drilling hard dollars. The only difference is the timing of that money coming in. You don't get it back till your tax credit. So as opposed to flow through, you get right away. You don't get those discounts or refunds until the following year. So $4 million gives us 10,000 meters program. One rig, probably sequence into two. With $10 million, with $8 million, we can drill 20,000 meters. 20,000 meters, probably the max we want to drill next season. Probably start with one rig, go 2 rigs, do our 20,000 meters. And depending on how things go back to a one rig and drill as long as we can to kind of reduce those lack of catalyst and us not drilling. But we got a lot of options ahead. And a lot of things can change with their first few drill holes. Because as you can see from those drill shoulders that we had, and I think we can connect the north and the south. And Charlie told me the other day he'd give his left arm that he'd be able to do it. So I'm going to take him up on that.
I think he was alluding to left something else first, and then he said left arm.
Yeah, did you see that?
I sure did. Yeah, so what you're saying is all-in drilling costs 400 Canadian bucks per meter, approximately, is what you're drilling for. 4 million for.
So $400 an ounce. $400 a meter, all in. And when I'm talking all in, I'm talking geology team working in Penticton there, gas, drilling, assays, soup to nuts. And $400 is probably the most. Probably comes in a little bit less. A lot of it's based on how not how many meters you drill, but how deep those drill holes are to come up with the final meterage. Because your drilling is all kind of based on how many days it gets you to get there, and the deeper you go, the longer it takes. Which means your fixed cost, which is your man days of your drillers, is spread across less meters. So if you do, for example, 10,000 meters, your average depth is 1,200 meters. Well, your cost is probably $480 per meter. But if your average drill depth is $600 meters, your average meter is maybe $360. So we're thinking about a $400 average. Also, if you bring in 2 drill rigs, obviously your drilling cost goes down because your fixed costs are, they're mixed over 2 rigs as opposed to 1. So long answer short, you're right, $400 per meter.
So
Canadian.
And your burn rate ex drilling, I mean, so your G&A, it's very low, as you alluded to, with the synergies that you have with the ore group. But what is it actually per year? If you look at it,
we're on a positive burn right now with these warrants getting exercised, but per year, just thumb stock, probably $500,000.
Oh, that's very, very, very. That's super good.
Maybe even less. So
could you, because I know you've spoken about this previously, what would it cost if you were to drill it during winter season, just so we can get a sense of economics or budget if you decide to go hard throughout the entire year, if you were to drill cold weather?
Yeah, people think we're afraid to drill in the winter. The winter's not even what we're afraid of. Like the winter's fine to drill in. For us, we didn't understand the geology before, so we did these incline holes. So it was about us actually taking time off to spend the time to understand the rocks. And you don't just put the assays into some program. We have 14,000 meters of drilling, so you got to ship those down to Penticton. You got to take them out into the warehouse, and then literally the guys go and they look at literally every meter and they log all the holes, and that takes a long time. It's still not done. And then once all that logging's done, then you put in the computer programs. It's not even about connecting the grades. It's about connecting the type of rocks, then putting the grades on top of that. So that's why we took the time off. We weren't afraid to drill in the winter. Winter drilling's not tough. It's actually easier in some spots because you're not dealing with water and stuff. Obviously, we're not on a swamp, so that's not an issue for us. Taking down trees is a little bit easier in the winter and water control. It's also nice to take the winter off because look, it's around Christmas time. These guys are working 24/7 for 6 months. It's nice to let them have time with their family and have them relax. It's all about kind of treating your people well. Having said that, it's probably 10%, 15% difference in cost in the winter, just because you're dealing with more price of gas, keeping things warm, and probably dealing with a little bit of water issues. It's hard to get water out of the ground because everything's frozen. So you got to bring in water trucks. They cost about $3,000 per day. But all in all, about 15% more in the winter. The real problem is the 3 months where you see the breakup, from the snow melting. It's hard to get the drill rigs from point A to point B. So even if we're drilling all the way through the season, I think the time that we would probably start is probably, mid-March to mid-May. Let those seasons break up and then come back when everything's dry again. Everything seems to be dry in mid-May.
So mid-March, mid-May, and you would stop at what time in the late fall? Would it be like November, late November, or
See
when
how
would you
things
stop?
go. Depends how many rigs we have. So on one hand, I'm thinking of doing 2 rigs. On the other hand, I've been talking to the team and saying, would we rather drill those 10,000 meters or those 20,000 meters with 2 rigs and finish up the season, or do we want to drill those 20,000 meters, start now and drill all the way for 10 straight months? Give no off season, allow constant news flow to happen, maybe pay a little bit more per meter in the ground. But, at the same time, when you're doing 1 rig, you're able to plan a little bit better because, you're seeing 1 assay at a time. You can more strategically, place the holes. At the same time, with 2 rigs, you can kind of get it over with. You pay a little bit less. You do that grid. So it's all about your cost of capital. It's kind of a decision we're probably going to start to try to make in the next couple of months. Not something we have to make today, but something to think about. But, the good thing in life, Gorm, is to have options, and that's what we have.
So the advance rate per day, per rig, what have you seen previously? What do you expect to see? Is it like 30 meters, 50 meters per day? How fast do you drill?
60 to 80 meters per day for a rig. Let's call it 50 to 80. We're getting deeper stuff. You're probably doing more to 40, and you're doing. I've seen days where we hit 30. I've seen days where we hit like 120. So on average, probably between 50 and 80, 65 meters a day is probably what I do as a thumb suck.
Okay. So 2 rigs. You would bring 2 rigs if you're pretty confident that you can exceed 10K, that you're actually feeling like, okay, we can probably do stretch towards 20K or possibly, or do 15, 16K.
I would. The only way I do 2 rigs is if we're doing 20K, but I don't necessarily even know if I do 2 rigs if we did 20K, because if we could still spread those 20K from May until end of March, if that's what we wanted to do. But it's all about strategy. It's all about news flow and talking to our investors and our partners and our geological team to see what's best for everybody.
What's the kind of the timeline you're thinking now? You need a couple of more months here to let the winter, the snow go away, and for you to interpret and prepare and stuff like this. Let the warrants come in so you can get a sense of the cash you'll actually have. When do you expect to make an announcement? Okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do 2 rigs or 1 rig, and we're going to start at X day.
Yeah, so look, I think we're probably going to start drilling end of May. What we really want to do is some more IP. IP works sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. For us, it has. It's really good at targeting for us. So once the snow goes, we're going to run some IP lines, 3 or 4 long lines so we can see deep and to really help us out on our targeting. Once that IP is done, the drilling will start. So probably looking at end of May. Always have the options to move out there sooner. It's all about cost of capital. The guys have really, we had Christmas after we ended drilling, and then our drill hole came out, and I've been pretty much selfish in taking Charlie and Neil on a road show for the last 3 weeks. So I've been taking them away from the rocks, which they want to focus on. So they haven't really been able to sit down. We just had VRIC and Roundup in the core shack. So they've still been stuck like in the city doing all these investor stuff. So I think probably a month and a half till they kind of really figure out where they want to drill. We did a really good technical presentation. Neil Prowse is our lead geo, did it. It's on our website. If you go into the projects page, you can see our technical presentation. We're going to do some more kind of slices of our IP. When people look at our IP, what you got to realize is if you look at our assays, we actually just missed on some of those high grade shoulders, which kind of proves that those shoulders, that thesis is correct. So we're going to bring up some different direction ones to show, the northern holes and how we just missed and how we just missed on one. So, we're going to slowly try to prove the story to everyone, but, you got to let the geology breathe. And at the same time, I got to have people know about our story. So it's about talking to, people in Scandinavia who you have a close relationship with, going over the world and telling people about, our company. Even in a really bad market, Gorm, like good properties work. People want to invest in good properties that create a lot of upside. Doesn't matter what the metal price is. And I think like cigarettes and alcohol, NAT could be one of those properties that's, inelastic.
What's the lab assaying time for what has it been so far, approximately?
Yeah, good question. So lab assay time, it changes based on what type of year you are in. If you're in a really busy drilling year, it obviously takes a little longer. The joke is people think you can speed assays. You can't. It's just like it's a way for the assay labs just to make more money. They don't come any faster. I've sped assays up. I don't speed assays up. They all seem to come in 4 to 6 weeks. I think the better question, Gorm, is how are we going to release our assays? Are we going to do them one by one? Or are we going to do them in pairs?
That's hard to say, right? Before you
It's
have the
hard to
results.
say. Look, it's. I'm a storyteller, right? And I'm working with investors, and I'm very cognizant of the market. And I feel like sometimes I'm like Tom Cruise in one of those Mission Impossibles, ripping down the highway 140 miles per hour on a motorcycle. If I hit one of those nickels, I'm going to fly right off. So we're very conscious of capital markets, share dilution, et cetera, and how our story is received. So we want to make sure that, when we put out assays, we put out good holes so the market understands it. So, even our holes that are perceived as being not great, they be perceived as being great holes from properties that haven't done as well as us. And it's not about the whole hole length. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. So, if you look at, hole 16, I believe that wasn't a great hole, but the bottom of that hole had some nice mineralization, and that bottom of the hole lined up with moving forward through that shoulder. So, people that are in the know that really kind of get into the deep, they're like, that hole 16 was great because it showed that shoulder kind of moves north. So, a whole assay length doesn't always tell the story. You got the devil's in the details, and that's why it's important to kind of know geologists and have them hold your hand and walk you through them. A big source right now, a lot of people are catching on to the story. So, it was us that understood it first. Teck understood it second, and some of these smart investors understand it third. But then you got people on Mintwit and Discord, if you can join those channels, and they start to explain it. And man, some of these guys know, I wouldn't say as much as a geologist, but pretty darn close. And they're understanding the story. And then these guys go and make models of themselves. Like I almost want to take their models and put them in our presentation. So that's a really good source to start doing your research, not just on American Eagle, but, a lot of different companies out there, because these guys know their stuff and they're more than dangerous.
So one thing that I just want to touch on briefly, and obviously Teck doesn't indicate that that's a problem since they decided to invest multiple times, but just the local community, do you have any, just with the native community, what's the kind of the profile there? For some Scandinavian investors might not know and might be concerned about that.
Yeah, look, there's six, it's First Nation or Indigenous community, but there's over 600 different groups in Canada, First Nations communities, and I think people kind of looking at it from like an airplane view kind of brush them all the same, which I think is unfair. Like they're different people, different communities, different amounts of wealth, different relationships they've had, good experiences, bad with people or businesses coming in the community. And I think you have to look at it that way. And like I said before, I wear my heart on my sleeve. I like to think I'm a genuine person. I'm always myself. And I treat people with respect and, maybe to a detriment sometimes, like, I'm honest. And I think with the First Nations, when we got onto land, like I'm in my 30s, like it's a brave new world for everyone. A lot of these companies that haven't worked on the First Nations communities is not even necessarily because of the properties. It's because the people running them just weren't very nice people, and they thought the land was theirs. The land is not American Eagle's. We are lucky to be partnered and use the land of Lake Babine Nation. Full stop. And they told me, they said that we're sick of administering poverty. We want there to be wealth and prosperity. We want there to be jobs. We want to grow the community. They don't just want us to work. They want a lot of the other mines in the region to work. If we work out, that means there'll be a lot more explorers and prospectors in the area moving mines forward. The only thing they said is they don't want it affecting their salmon. That's why, a local mine didn't work, but we're away from the water, away from that main Morrison Lake. So that's no problem with us. So, they're every step behind us right now. And I called them. I said, if you don't want us to be here, we don't want to be here. And they said, we want you to be here again. They don't want us to affect their salmon, which we don't. And Chief Murphy, who I've become very good friends with, over the last couple of years, he did us a favor. The ministry is pretty slow to get permits. It takes about a year. And he wrote a letter to the ministry, asked them to fast track a permit. So it all started off really well there. So he helped us get the permit. And, it's just about communication. They're as much a part of the story as we are. So we let them know when we're coming out with news releases. We talked about everything. They don't even do 1 year permits anymore in BC. It's minimum 2. But we told them, we talked to the ministry, give us a 1, since First Nations gave us that. They appreciated that. Usually 5-year permits come with 50 drill collars. We did 25 drill collars, just because we don't want to overstep our boundaries. When we did that drill hole 2309, we could have punched a road through there, but we don't want to take down 800 meters, path of trees if we don't know there's mineralization. So we paid an extra $100,000 to fly a helicopter to make sure that there's mineralization. It's those careful steps in the communication. I think that's really, really helped. But as well, it's just being yourself. It's meeting with these people. It's watching hockey. It's having a beer or pizza, learning about their families, the community, going out there. The best footsteps of the farmer, Gorham. Sorry, the best fertilizer, Gorham, is the footsteps of the farmer. So you have to go to site, shake hands, see people, know who they're partnering with, and it's not just me, because I'm just a suit sitting in Toronto and go there sometimes, but it's the people on the ground. It's the Neil Prowses, it's the Dave Hoax who are on our geology team that go and they work there. And the other big thing, Gorham, is like, we want to give jobs. So I believe we had 4 people from Lake Babbie Nation actually work in our geology team, this summer and this fall. They're cutting core, they're working in the shack, etc. So we're giving them skills and hoping that they kind of work their way up too. And eventually, if this becomes a mine someday, we're going to employ thousands of people. So all those things are kind of working together. Another long answer. Sorry about that, but we have a really great relationship with Lake Babbie Nation. They're just really good people.
So the permitting, you said you were permitted for 1 year. When did you receive that? When will permitting have to be redone again? Is that a concern?
Yeah, sorry. Like like I said, my honesty kind of creates other questions. So we when it first got on, we got a 1 year permit. That was 2022. We got a permit in May 2022, and then last year we got a permit for last year we got a permit for 5 years. So in May 2023,
Right.
we got a 5-year permit.
Okay.
And then right now we're increasing the number of collars that we can have, and we're allowed to build that path over to the east side. So everything's working really well, and we're going down to do some community engagement in mid-February. We're doing a job show or whatever you call it in late May. So everything's going swimmingly so far, at least in the community.
So a 5-year permit, you can drill however you want, but you need to also kind of apply for where you specifically are going to drill with the colors, right? And how many colors do you have permitted now?
Yeah, so
give some detail on that would be interesting.
Yeah, so every province is different. So I'll speak to the BC province. So usually you can ask for whatever you want, but you got to stay within reason. BC permits usually are 5-year ones to come with 50 drill collars. So when you're doing your drill plan, it's hard to know where your 50 collars are if you have like a huge property. Our property is a little bit more condensed, so we kind of have a good idea of where you are. But if you put your 50 drill collars there, you don't have to like go right to that collar. You have to be within 1 kilometer of that collar. So 50 collars you could almost get almost anywhere within the property. And you also have to remember that means 50 collars, but it doesn't mean 50 holes. So you can do 200 holes on 50 different collars if you want to spin those rigs around. So it's really just clearing one area where you put the collar, you put the drill rig. That's 1 collar. But if you drill 3 holes there, that's still 1 collar.
Yeah, it will not be a constraint for this, even if you go 20K. Fair to say. Yeah.
Thanks very much for having us, Gorm. My name's Charlie Greig. I'm a geologist, Canadian geologist from BC, and we're working on obviously on the NAC porphyry for American Eagle Gold. Myself and my team, Neil Prowse is going to be on with me today. He's the project leader. I guess I've been in the exploration industry more or less 40 years, started off as a soil sampler, so I've done a lot of the dirty work and still continue to do a little bit of the dirty work, not as much as I used to, but I did an undergrad and a master's at University of British Columbia, some grad work down in southwestern U.S. And I've worked quite a bit for the Geological Survey of Canada early in my career, a little bit for the British Columbia Geological Survey, and then exploring mainly in the Cordillera, North America, predominantly in British Columbia, but also elsewhere around the world, a bit in Africa and South America, Mexico, and in the States. And then was involved, fairly recently in the discovery of the Saddle North porphyry copper gold system for GT Gold, which was a big success that Newmont bought from. Well, didn't buy from. They actually took out the whole company in 2020, or 2021 actually. But so that was a big recent success, and now the last couple of years, my team, led by Neil, have been exploring the NAC porphyry.
I'm Neil Prowse. I've been working in exploration for the last 8 years, full time, and previous to that, bouncing around as a soil sampler and core cutter. So yeah, I've done a lot of the dirty work as well, and been working with Charlie every step of the way. So I'm running the exploration project for American Eagle Gold at NAC, and yeah, it's been a really exciting project so far. Okay, so yeah, we'll start with an overview of our current understanding of the surface geology, which is derived mainly from historical drill hole interpretation, combined with the much coarser scale regional mapping. And then we'll dive into the different geophysical anomalies that kind of characterize the scale of the deposit. And it's really what brought the historical operators to the area in the first place. And so, yeah, this is a map right now of the surface geology. The pink circle in the middle here is our roughly, as we understand it right now, cylindrically emplaced granodiorite stock. Now, surrounding this granodiorite stock is our classic magnetic high, resistivity high, and then broad chargeability halo around the outside. With that porphyry stock here about 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer in dimension, and the phyllic halo surrounding it almost 3 kilometers across. Actually, a little bit larger. So,
can you just point out where the historical holes are, Neil?
Yeah, so the historical holes.
Versus...
So this is all the holes that have been drilled on the property. I'll turn off the holes that we have drilled. And this is the historical drilling with the historical assays on it. Bearing in mind, this was BQ core, which can sometimes underrepresent the gold, so it's quite a bit narrower. And we don't have silver information or molybdenum information, and we found those to be fairly significant contributors. So it's not, quite comparing apples to apples, but in general, you can still see where these drill hole traces. This is a top-down perspective 3D view. So we're looking through a slightly transparent surface drape. And what we can see is where these zones are yellow and a little bit wider, that corresponds to a higher grade. So in this case, anything red is over 1% copper, anything yellow is between 0.3 and 0.5, orange is between 0.5 and 1, and green on this color scale is between 0.1 and 0.3% copper equivalent. So historically, there was a very broad anomaly defined. These are very shallow holes. The average depth is only testing about 170 meters below surface, and only 7 holes tested below 300 meters for the entire historical drilling. So what we came in and did was test along the western margin of the intrusion, which is where historically they defined the south zone, as I'm covering here with my mouse, and the north zone. And these were broad, relatively low-grade, near-surface copper anomalies. We came in and drilled quite a bit deeper, and we stepped out a little bit, right? Because we want to show that there's scale, but we also want to see, is there some higher-grade mineralization as a result of this really large system, which you often get in porphyries. And so this is with the drilling we've done now in 2022 and 2023. You can see the average hole depth of the historical holes, very, very shallow. The only holes testing down below that are the holes we've drilled, and drilling off to the west of the south zone and the north zone is where we've encountered our best grade, far better grades than anything known historically. So I'll just go back up to the surface view here, and we'll turn on the mag and the IP, and then we'll bring through the Voxel model and show why we're so excited right now, and then pass it over to Charlie, and can discuss what we know about how the geology and the best grade interact, because there's actually some very, there's some very good correlations between our more porous sedimentary lithologies and our best grade as well. So yeah, let's take a look at the magnetic signature. So roughly centered about this porphyry stock, there's a very strong annular magnetic high. And that's knowing that we have a lot of primary magnetite within the porphyry intrusion and a very strongly magnetic potassic zone. The mag is actually correlating very well to the general deposit area. So I'll turn the mag off now and bring in the surface drape of the IP. And this is where you can really see that phyllic halo. So this is a zone more distal to the porphyry intrusion that has a lot of very finely disseminated pyrite. And that's why we're seeing such a strong chargeability response around the porphyry intrusion. Just for a bit of scale, these grids, this is a 500 meter by 500 meter grid draped over the surface. So you can really see the scale potential here. Most of our drilling is along this western margin within this middling IP chargeability response. So what I'll do now is turn on the voxel inversion model. And before we get into that, just say this surface drape of the IP was generated from historical IP surveying. There were shorter lines that saw down accurately to about 150, maybe 200 meters max. What we did later in the season this year, in 2023, was start our lines almost at the shore of the lake and ran 3 very long diagonal lines, actually extending up and off the property, just so we can get a better handle deep down below the historical IP survey. So we ran that survey, merged that data with the historical inversion model, and we saw some pretty pronounced correlations between our IP shoulder, which you've probably heard Tony mention, and our best grade. And what that IP shoulder is it is really kind of mapping where our best potassic alteration. And in this case, the potassic alteration manifests as very fine biotite and magnetite. We don't see, typically like lots of potassium feldspar development, except within narrow selvages in the intrusive stock itself, lining some of the bornite and chalcopyrite veins. But in general, our potassic alteration is confined to our sedimentary lithologies, dominantly conglomerate and coarser sandstone, with a lot of biotite and magnetite. And so that's what this IP shoulder is mapping. So we'll get into the IP survey here, this Voxel model, and we'll start slicing through it. And so what we're talking about when we say this IP shoulder, if you look at these zones of best grade, so this is slicing through the South Sound now. This is hole 17, which was our very good grade, most recent hole released, and our last hole of the 2023 program. And so part of the targeting for this hole was actually looking at this IP data and saying, well, we have a really strong correlation as we transition from low chargeability into high chargeability in hole 11 and hole 8. Rather than one of the options being we're drilling right down a narrow structure at the orientation we drilled it in hole 11, perhaps it is really well correlated to this IP shoulder. So the idea was to step about 250 meters away on surface and drill down that IP shoulder to see if that correlation holds. And that was where we hit our longest best grade intercept. So there was very positive correlation. And when we step to the north, slicing through, we get back. So there's a big gap to the north where we have no information. There's no historical drilling, and we have not tested it. As we get into our north zone, this is about 500 meters to the north of the south zone. That IP shoulder correlation still holds very, very strong. And so it stands to reason that stepping this out, and actually the only historical hole that is testing over here, when it got down to this bench level, as it starts to plunge a bit steeper, that was the highest grade part of the hole. And you can see the shallow drilling, they only tested it very shallowly. So yeah, this correlation holds very strongly to the north. Same deal with hole 14. Our best grade was in that Midland chargeability response. There's very little testing out along the other side, and there's still very positive encouragement along there. Yeah, and it even holds to the north in the historical drilling as well. So we're pretty encouraged by this. And the other positive indication we had was where we stepped out to the east in hole 9. So just rotate this plane looking 90 degrees. And we can see the correlation, or that IP signature, the low chargeability corresponding to the center of the intrusion, and the high chargeability correlating to what we know to be the Phylloc halo through drilling well into it. We can see a very strong correlation out along that eastern margin as well. The southern margin out to the east where we drilled hole 9. Yeah, this was where hole 9 was drilled. So looking through this IP voxel model, you can see we hit very encouraging grade right from surface, and it was very strongly anomalous right until we got into the intrusive stock down at the bottom. We drilled a little bit too far to the north based on our current understanding. And so stepping a little bit further to the north with our collar locations and then trying to intersect the shoulder zone perpendicularly will give us a much better handle on the scale out along this southern zone to the east of where we were drilling in 2023. One thing to note with this survey, the way that this model is generated, it looks like there's quite a strong chargeability response at depth. That's very likely due to the very high chargeability responses along the margin. And it's interpolating that data. Because we don't have these deep seeing lines, it was just 3 lines across the center of the property. The first order of business for next season is to do more lines to the north and more lines to the south and refine this model just so that we can have just the best chance of hitting the best grade right off the bat. 2022, we were kind of proving the concept that there was mineralization deeper and beyond the extent of the historical drilling. In 2023 was showing the scale of that potential, which we showed up to 400 meters to the west of the south zone, as well a broad intercept in the north zone of much, much higher grade than historically understood. And now we're excited to infill between the north and south zone where it's completely open and within the same geological and geophysical signature, and continue exploring along to the south and then eventually around to the west and even north of this. There's a lot of ground to explore on the property, which is why we're so enthusiastic going into this 2024 season.
Hey, maybe Neil, it's Charlie here, just chipping in. Maybe we could zoom in maybe on that with your model, just showing that southernmost section, and then you could pop open an image of that section where we're doing a relog, where we actually have the greatest amount of geological control, in that the holes are relatively close together compared to our other deep holes from 2022 and 2023, given there's only 17 in total.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that the section that, there you are there, I guess you're looking from the south to the north. That's right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And I think that the other point I think it's important for us to make on that is, you can see that the topography is relatively subdued where those holes were drilled, and there's a creek valley to the west of the holes, where there's there might be a little bit of outcrop, not much, but where we've drilled, we have almost no outcrop. I think we don't have any. There's a little bit of outcrop up at the higher elevations to the east where the pink colors are, and is underlain by the stock, I believe, in large part. Is that correct or no? Is that
The
beyond?
stock is along this slope up here. So to the north
Right.
of the stock, there's some outcrop, but there's very little outcrop out to the west, or sorry, out to the east. And yeah, like you said, out to the west, it's beyond this
Oh,
Creek Valley.
that's the chart. That's the chargeability, not the mag. So the chargeability, that's the phyllic halo in the to the east of the stock in pink, right? And then the phyllic halo to the west of the stock in the brighter colors, sort of on the other side of the creek there. So yeah, that's an important point. So we have no geological surface control in terms of a geologic map other than what we see, at the top of the collar. So there's 20 to 30, 40, and maybe in places a little bit more overburden, so mainly glacial till from where we're drilling. So we have no geological control in terms of measurements of dike contacts or or veining orientations or anything like that in this area. So we're looking at that cross section. Now, did you say you had an image of the of the relog that we've done, or is this the only image that we have of that cross section?
Yeah, let me just check to see.
We don't really need it. We could use that. That would be fine too. So, but if you have it, it'd be kind of helpful. It just shows those holes, and no, basically very little info. Yeah, that's the one. You could just zoom out on that whole thing would be good.
There we go.
It has a little inset map on it that shows that's the mag, I believe, there.
Yep.
So kind of a westward kind of prong off the main magnetic high that is underlain by the porphyry stock itself. So it's a big, a relatively large body, primary magnetite for the most part in it that generates a mag high, like a lot of intrusions do. But there's quite a bit of alteration related magnetite in this part of the section. So that granodiorite stock on this is a recent relog we've done, with assay data in hand. So we wanted to go back and try and examine, where the high geochemistry was, and what was that related to. Could we generate a better understanding of the geologic control? So I think, there's a few things you can note on that. There's overburden at the top, maybe of the holes. You can see it in sort of a gray color. So these are deep holes. We're going down almost a kilometer. I think the deepest one there on the right-hand side in terms of depth from surface is probably pushing 900 meters. Is that right? 800 and something?
881 meters for one.
Right. And you can see that in the pink colors, that hit mainly rock that's closely related to that granodiorite stock. So it looks like it's a steeply westerly dipping contact because that's an east-west section. It's a section, a slice through from surface, a vertical section. So maybe you could just, follow down that contact where it would go. It'd be, a steep from surface, dipping steeply westerly. That's right. And then there's some pink dikes that are somewhat related, I think, to the granodiorite stock, which is Eocene in age, roughly 52, 53 million years old. We sort of knew the age going in from older sort of 70s era potassium to maybe even 60s era potassium argon dating, which gives a cooling age, but I think it's roughly the same age that we've gotten recently from uranium lead zircon dates. So it's 52, 53 million years in age. And then there's plenty of dikes that are associated with that, both temporally, in time. They come out with the same ages that we've dated. And they're placed into a mainly sedimentary sequence that we don't know the age of, other than the fact that it's older than Eocene because the dikes and the stock intrude it. So it's mainly an Eocene system, intruded into somewhat older sedimentary rocks, sandstones, conglomerates, siltstones, and then some very fine-grained rocks, sedimentary rocks. And you can see some of them in the colors on this map. So all the sedimentary rocks are basically shown in yellow. And again, this is a very preliminary plot from our relog. that some of the young geos and I went through. So, I wanted to make sure I saw those and gave my sage advice from someone that has a little more experience. And they basically got it right. But one thing that we outlined was that these coarse conglomeratic rocks correlate well with where the good grades are. So maybe you could show roughly where the best grades are. They're kind of in the middle parts of the holes, a broad halo of what we call BC type porphyry grades, but with a very broad, very nice intercept that centers on them. So yeah, you're going to pop open the grades there. Yeah, that's the same section.
So this is very similar section, slightly different lithology code because it's not based on that relog. It's based on the initial codes, but you can still see within the legend here, the conglomerate units were picked out very, very well, I believe. It was the distinction between the sandstone and some of the dikes that was causing troubles, just based on how altered some of these are and how similar they can look. It was that geochemistry that really helps pull it out. But yeah, this is where the best grade is. So it's basically, as soon as we get into the conglomerate, we start to see the grade really pick up. And it stays within the coarse sandstone quite well. And then it's as we get closer to the boundary with the porphyry stock, the contact with the porphyry stock, that the grade is still quite strong. Like it's all about 0.2% copper equivalent. And then it peters out. You get some spikes of some nice chalcopyrite and bornite veining as we get close to it, and then as we get into the porphyry stock itself, that's where it drops out, given that there's very little disseminated, almost like no disseminated sulfide within the porphyry stock. It's just in discrete veins where we see the mineralization, unlike the conglomerate in the sandstone, which has veins and lots of disseminated copper bearing sulfides. So this is a distribution of the grade.
I think one of the important points here, sorry, Neil, it's I know you've got a bit of a delay, so you probably don't hear me interrupting you right away. But, sorry about that. But the holes that are sort of faded out in the background are basically on the same section. They're a little bit off section, so this is a slice that's probably 100 meters thick. So, but they are in the same section, and the better grade parts of holes 11 and 8, which you maybe could point out there, Neil. 8 is the inclined hole on the east side, and 11's the parallel hole. Those are about 100 meters apart, so they're substantially separated from one another. And the better grade parts fit very well with that same geological unit. And we can track that unit between all three of those holes. It doesn't really hit the steep hole on the east, because that's mainly in the granodiorite stock that intrudes it. But the conglomerate dips gently to the east, and we didn't know that before. Now we've kind of confirmed that by the intersections in these three holes. So it dips gently to the east, which is to the right on that slide. And we haven't tested it sort of up dip to the west either. So that's open, where that open symbol is shown. I think another thing that's very interesting in this view is you can see the good grade that's at the top of hole 1 and hole 8. So maybe you could just run your cursor around that area, up there. And I wasn't really aware of this until I pulled those holes out. But those holes and that grade, which is quite gold rich, and obviously very nice because it's right close to surface, those are related to a quartz stockwork. And so that style of mineralization there is a little different to the shoulder. So it shows that this is a complex system. And as a geologist, that's kind of what you like to see. This is a very large system. We know that from the geophysical signature, the overall geophysical signature, and from the fact that we've drilled holes over a strike length from south to north of 800 plus meters now, that it's a big system, and it's also complex. So it has different elements, that are positive in terms of grade. So that's one of the things that, I just became aware of and that I really like, is that, there's different styles of mineralization and they can be large and with very good grade. So this is looking like a very nice part of the system to continue to explore in. And this is the only section really where we have holes, deep holes, close enough to one another that we can actually correlate the geology well in. So what we have here is that steep granodiorite stock contact on the east side. And then as you go west, within this conglomerate unit, you have a variety of intrusive dikes, probably roughly similar in age to the granodiorite stock. We see them actually cutting the granodiorite, so they might be just slightly younger. And those bring in mineralization. So those are mineralized, maybe not always as well mineralized as the country rocks, which are the conglomerates, but they bring that mineralization. They're associated with that mineralization genetically. And the rocks that are around the longest and have been intruded by a number of these phases of dikes, they get to be the best mineralized rocks around, and that's the conglomerates. So it's important that we have a number of these phases of dikes. It's important that we have receptive wall rocks, either chemically or perhaps they're more permeable. We don't really know for sure. And now we want to track that association out. And one of the ways we do that is to understand the orientation of them. It looks like we've got an understanding of the conglomerate orientation dipping gently east here. And the other thing we don't know exactly, we do know that some of the dikes, I think, trend to the north and are steep, such as close to the granodiorite contact where you could see the pink in the relog part. But we've got to chase down those mineralizing dikes a bit better. And once we understand those, then we can walk that geology, use that geology to target our drill holes in the future. So, how do we do that? I think we drill near to where we've drilled this, such as where the open symbol is there, and then start stepping that north systematically toward the north zone. And I think we can fill in that gap using the geophysical expression. As Neil said, we're going to do a bit more geophysics right off the hop at the start of the season. So start off that way, get a bit better geophysical control, then use that geophysics and our knowledge of the geology to help us target drill holes in the future. So that's just standard approach, and I think that bodes well for our chances of success.
To try to understand the broader implications of this for the system, because you have the stockwork centrally placed, right, and around it you have this IP halo, to my understanding, and between this is what you call the shoulders. But between this, when the stockwork meets the I guess the kind of lower grade, should be lower grade halo of the porphyry, which is the kind of the red orangey color there. That's where you have this conglomerate unit. Does that mean that this conglomerate unit likely wraps around the entire stockwork on the property?
No, I would say probably not. I think the thing that's really controlling the orientation, we know there's good mineralization at the north zone and at the south zone, and it's kind of a north-south. If you draw a line between the two, it's roughly north-south or north-northwest. My feeling is that trend, which is kind of outlined a little bit by a little bit lower chargeability there, to some degree, and by magnetics. My guess is that there's some intrusive dikes that bring mineralization in that trend in that direction, and that's really what we're chasing. So they're a little bit younger part of the the intrusive system, the NAC intrusive system. That Babine porphyry stock was maybe a little bit maybe an intermediate in terms of timing and placement, and then there's some younger dikes, but I think there probably is some older dikes. So some of the darker colors on that relog section, I believe, are dikes. I'm pretty sure they are, and they might have been a little bit earlier phase. I don't know exactly the orientation of those things. So yeah, some of those dark colors, I just labeled them dark porphyry. They vary a little bit texturally. It's not as obvious what their orientation is, so they could be coming in through a little bit of an angle. So perhaps there's more than one orientation there, and we'll only find that out with more drilling. So we're going to be working on that and using the high field strength geochemistry, titanium values, zirconium values, etc., and ratios of those elemental values to try and characterize those dikes, and obviously just looking at the things and getting used to what they might look like, and then trying to correlate them and see where they go. And so using that kind of information, but I think there is a strong northwest element to it. We'll just follow that kind of northerly, and hopefully be able to systematically follow the grade visually as we drill it, and outline the better zones within, what is clearly, a very large, lower grade, but still mineable system. So all of these holes are mineralized pretty much all the way down, and ultimately could be mineable. But, what we really need to kind of kick this off is to outline what we've outlined in holes 17, 8, 11, and 1 on this section, which is, a substantial volume of better grade that really helps you, pay back your capital early on in a project. So you want to start on the good stuff, or the best stuff, I should say, and then keep going. But once you've paid back your capital, then it's all gravy there, and with a large system like this, you can keep going for decades.
So, I mean, for the broader system, of course, it's huge. So it will take a long time to kind of get a full understanding of what this, or approximation of a full understanding. But
that's right.
The kind of the main potassic core, which you usually should have in a porphyry, right? If it's not eroded or something like that, would that? I mean, do you think that the higher grade stuff that you're poking into now, is that related to the main potassic core, or kind of the hot part of the system, or would that be somewhere deeper or somewhere else? What's your intuition, or what's the evidence?
That's a good question. That's the $64 billion question, I guess. These dike systems must be related to a system there. They are a little bit younger. I don't think we need to be drilling right in the core of the Babine porphyry stock that we know of. And I think the way to find that is to follow it. Yeah, we're hoping that there's some high grade potassic core. I mean, the core of potassic alteration can also be barren. We might need to be marginal to that. If you look at the classic models, sometimes the best grade is just marginal to that. So I don't know that we've hit that yet, or we're on the edge of it. I'm not sure. But the way I like to do things is, look, we've got some great grade. Let's stick on that. Let's not venture too far from that. And if we have, a really compelling geophysical signature, and we see, something that's vectoring towards maybe a hotter part of the system, we keep going that way. But, my perspective is the vectoring you really need is to be in grade, and, vector to better grade, step by step, and not step too far away and lose your way. It is a junior mining company. We're subject to the market forces. Market forces are pretty unfavorable to junior companies right now. So you want to try and drill hits rather than drilling dusters, as we call them. We don't want those, and we haven't had them. So let's keep going.
But if you zoom out, if we were to assume that you are in one of the most favorable part of the system already, that's not really centrally placed, right?
No,
it's placed off to the left or to the west in the system. So, of course, these things can be complex, and the potassic part or hot part could be somewhere where you wouldn't expect. But what's going on at depth centrally? What's going on the other parts? Will there be more displaced kind of hot parts of the system somewhere else? And what's your thinking on that?
Well, it could be. I mean, what strikes me is this, as Neil called it, this, this annular pattern, both in the mag and in the IP. I don't see. I can see there being faults and things, some kind of displacement on things, but I don't see a huge displacement on that annular pattern. And I see, that northwest trend in the in this, the IP chargeability, it's muted, just, as you go northwest from where Neil's cursor is. But if you just ran that cursor up that trend, Neil, and the chargeability there, and the mag has sort of a trend there, and it has that westward prong in the mag in particular in the southern part there, where we've drilled. So I think putting the two together, just that prong, I think it would help us to better define those parameters and see how that works, and then remodel it. But the models themselves, the geologic models with the potassic core and the phylic halo and stuff, this broadly fits this very nicely. But every porphyry is different, and I think we just don't have that great of a geologic understanding because of the amount of cover on this property. So there just is not a great geologic understanding. Maybe broadly there is, but we're just building that. Even though there's a lot of holes, none of those historical holes, and I think there's almost 80 or a little over 80.
77.
They're not available. So they're historical. The core is gone. We haven't been able to have a look at it. So we just have the 17 holes to go on. And I think one of the things we'd like to do is to get out and put a grid across the property where we put our own boot prints on the ground for a change. We haven't had the opportunity to do that. It's just been drill driven so far, and maybe we can come up with some better ideas geologically. But I'm a little loath to do wildcat drilling after a geological model. I'd rather just kind of build it as we go, and then keep referring back and trying to upgrade that. And we are involving some porphyry experts that give us a hand. We've had Alan Wilson take a quick look for us last year. Alan's coming back in March again to look at this once we've gone through all the core again, and we'll be posing probably those same questions that you're asking us to Alan. So no pressure, Alan. Deliver though. Deliver. Anyway, I'm just joking. He's a good guy, and he'll appreciate that. There's a bit of humor in that one, I think, too.
With the limited drilling that you guys have now, what does the kind of metal split characterization seem to be of the porphyry in terms of copper, molybdenum, and gold? And you said you had just above the stockwork at the top of hole 1, you have this very high gold thing showing up. Could that be a little cupola of elevated gold, and how would that get there, and what was the split there? So give some context.
Well, Neil can deal with the relative quantities. I think I know them broadly. I don't know if I'd call that a cupola, but I'll let Neil answer that one.
Yeah, so that south zone where we drilled at the beginning of 2022 and collared hole 8 this year, that's characterized by a much higher gold proportion than copper proportion relative to the copper equivalent calculation. So it was the upper 120 meters of over a gram per ton gold on average, and about 0.3 copper. So very gold rich. And that's within that more rubbly stockwork zone that we're finding. As we step further out into the conglomerate, it doesn't really look like a classic quartz stockwork. It's a lot more just broadly disseminated and actually like phenocryst replacement within some of the phenocrysts within the intrusive class. There's class of intrusive rock, or volcanic rock, volcaniclastic rock. It's a bit of a heterolithic mixed bag in the conglomerate. The mineralization in that is dominantly as disseminations. There are some veins, but a lot of those veins are what I think we're inferring right now are maybe a little bit later stage anhydrite veins, as well as just some narrow sulfide dominant veins, but mostly it's disseminations. And within this western area of the south zone, it's about an even mix between molybdenum, gold, and copper. And as we step to the north, the mineralization style is very, very similar. There's a bit of a higher proportion of bornite. And as such, the copper grade is a bit higher. The gold is still fairly strong, 0.2 to 0.4, some kicks up of over a gram per ton as we get deeper into the north zone. But the copper is about 75% of the copper equivalent calculation in the north zone. And molybdenum is notably lower. So yeah, north zone, more copper rich, still with some moderate gold values. The south zone, quite a bit more gold rich with moly starting to come in. And as we step further to the east, we saw that exact same element ratio hold. So there's actually a very positive correlation between molybdenum and gold spikes in the western zone and this eastern zone along the southern margin of the intrusion. And copper is very consistent throughout that. So copper and gold are very clearly associated. And then where we see gold kicks, it's because we see moly kicks or vice versa. But there is a very strong correlation with that. So there's, like Charlie said, it's not a simple single thing to be looking for here. It's a complex system, and there's some different manifestations of the distribution of elements within that overall grade. So yeah, very, very interesting.
So I guess traditionally, to my knowledge, molybdenum is used to track porphyries generally and to track the hotter part of the porphyry, generally speaking. Is that a useful tool for you? It seems like to the south, you said that there was more moly than to the north so far. Is that a useful vectoring tool for some?
In BC porphyries, I wouldn't say that's always the case. Generally, BC porphyries have a copper gold rich end member and a gold moly or a copper moly rich end member, depending on the source intrusion and the host rocks. We see a bit of both flavors here. We see copper gold rich and we see copper moly rich, but I don't know if it's that classic copper moly porphyry, because that moly, I think, is coming in a little bit later and it's with the gold. So moly here, I'm not sure if we're able to use that to place us in the traditional sort of porphyry context. Gold and copper for sure. There's a bit of an alkalic signature to that, but the molybdenum is interesting. And so, yeah, it's, our understanding of that and the distribution is going to evolve as we get more information. The data density is still very, very low. It's a very large volume of rock to test, and we only have 17 holes, and there is some very large distance between, the deepest part of hole 9 is kilometer away or more from the deepest part of hole 11, where we're seeing similar element correlations. So there's a lot of information to infill.
So while we're on the kind of the elements discussion, have you guys been able to kind of get some indication of what you haven't done any met work yet, but any indication of what you're dealing with, if it's kind of similar throughout where you've drilled in the deposit, or if you have various kind of makeups of mineralization in terms of how it's hosted?
No metallurgy work done yet. That's something to be looking ahead to for sure. But what we send off is going to depend on what we find in these zones. We don't know if there's a nice transition between gold and copper dominant as we step from the north to the south, because we just don't have information in filling that. And so, yeah, I suspect, based on the amount of bornite we see in the copper-rich zones, I think that it's going to be pretty positive indications from any network, just given the extra value that adds to concentrate. And similarly in the south zone, we don't see a lot of pyrite. The pyrite picks up in abundance as we get a bit further out, but that corresponds to the grade dropping off. But the main zone within our best mineralization is very pyrite poor. So again, that's also very positive for network. The other thing to look at here is there's very, very low arsenic, very, very low antimony, very little influence from any deleterious elements as well. And that's very similar to other BC porphyries. BC porphyries in general are quite clean, which is another good thing they have going for them. So yeah, it's we expect pretty reasonable results from the metallurgy, but again, we little early stage to be sending that off right now. But I would be very surprised if we don't have some of those results through 2024.
I think the other thing to mention there when you're talking metallurgy is, we've got this empirical measurement from empirical results from a couple of mined porphyries not very far away that are of the same age and have, some broad geological, geochemical, and mineralogical similarities, and that's the Grand Isle and Bell porphyry open pit deposits that were down by Babine Lake, kind of on the way into Knack. So, those had very high recoveries, and that was not a problem really at all. So, I think the similarities there, Knack has probably, got a thumbs up that way. I would be willing to bet that the metallurgy will be fine, with what Neil's just discussed.
And were those mines recovering gold and moly as well?
Yes, it varied in those mines, but certainly at depth they were getting better in terms of the gold values. But they were copper moly mines with gold for sure. I forget, maybe Grand Isle was a little less gold rich, but I know Bell was pretty gold rich as you went down. That's correct.
Yeah, I think one of the mines they built a moly circuit and never ended up using it. It was a lot more moly poor, but they were recovering moly out of one of them, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we just get back to you're tracking, your kind of low hanging fruit, I guess, plan is to just connect south and north here in this. I guess trying to track the conglomerate. I take it because you believe it extends in the north-south direction.
Presuming,
presuming.
Yeah.
So could you? Limited information, of course, but could you give a sense of the potential dimensions of that conglomerate in not just in the strike, I guess, north-south, but potentially, how deep it might be and how wide it might be, east-west?
Well, yeah, I guess you can see it east-west there. I don't know how far. It's those are 500-meter blocks, are they, Neil? The lines on the grid.
Yeah, those look like 500 meter.
Yeah,
blocks.
It's hundreds of meters across east to west. It dips gently to the east on this section, so it's hundreds of meters true thickness. I would say, at least 300. And then, as Neil mentioned, the sandstones above and below the conglomerate, maybe not, they've got some conglomerate in it. So it's definitely hundreds of meters thick. In terms of, as where it goes to the north, I'm pretty sure we see conglomerate in nearly all the holes. Do we not, Neil? All the way to the north.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. All the way. Hole 12 is a massive body of conglomeratic rock, and that's
so we don't,
where the best
we
race
don't
starts.
really know the geometry, but we do know that it's all across this part of the property. We don't know about it, in the other holes because their description of the rocks doesn't really fit in the old logs, what we've described as far as I know.
It was too shallow to hit the conglomerate in the north zone, and they never drilled to the west in the south zone, so it wasn't encountered. And what we know historically, the sandstones and the finer grained sedimentary rocks, at the regional geology of the time, it was inferred to be Telcoa Formation volcanics. And so a lot of it was logged as andesites, which we have not seen. And so they interpreted the narrow intervals of conglomerate they saw as pebble dikes associated with the porphyry. And they were quite well mineralized, but they only hit, several meters of it. They didn't hit these big packages. And so when we drilled deeper below the north zone in hole 4 last year, where we hit our very nice mineralized conglomerate, it was very clear, these are not pebble dikes. These are very nicely well-rounded conglomerates. And as you would expect with conglomerates, they're very porous. They act as a very good host for porphyry mineralization. So this package of conglomerate is extensive in the north as well.
So what conceptual model are you kind of using to limit the spacing of the drilling in the true thickness direction, so to speak, or in the east-west, the width of the potential conglomerate? Or do you not really have any idea of
you
it?
know, I think what we have is, you know, is some geophysical characteristics that seem to correspond with where the best grade is, and that would correspond to, you know, in a very simple-minded fashion. You know, I'm a simple-minded guy, so you know, it's like the conglomerate goes this way, you know, north to south. Let's say now we kind of think it's gently easterly dipping, and it's cut by steep north-northwest trending dikes. You know, with the caveat that let's start in the south where we know we have some goodies, and maybe there's a bit more of an east-west component to things there. So we got to be a little bit careful when we start down there. But we have signs of good grade in almost every hole that's encompassed by, you know, more BC type grade all the way down, and all these holes, you know, from south to north. So, you know, just very simple-minded way of looking at it is use the geophysics and follow it in that direction, you know, systematically with pretty broad step outs, but maybe not too broad, so, you know, that we can actually correlate things from hole to hole, you know, but at least 100 meters apart, maybe a bit more. And do that systematically, so we have systematic spacing. And then if we see we can link things up from hole to hole with that, then, you know, people can do a back of the envelope resource calculation, and you put some dimensions on that. You know, let's go 600 meters down, or 7 or 8 or whatever, and maybe let's call it 7, and let's go, you know, 2, 3, 400 meters across, and let's go, you know, 700 meters north south. And you know, if we have some good stuff in there, you're building a very large tonnage. So you know, I think that would be the way to do it. You know, is it going to work out that way? Might be a little more complicated, but we're hopeful. So far we've drilled within that box very deeply, you know, on a number of holes, and we've certainly hit on every one of them. So was that just a fluke? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe it's there.
Seems unlikely at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of the way I would look at it. You know, we've done broad space drilling and hit. We did some tighter space drilling on this, and it's not. This is not tight space. I mean, those 8 and 11 are parallel. Those parallel two holes are still 100 meters apart. So, you know, that's a good step out there, and builds tons quickly. So, yeah, I like it.
So, kind of to summarize, see if I got this right. So, the conceptual idea now is to drill out the conglomerate unit, which hopefully it's how many 100 meters down is it from surface? 300? It starts.
Well, it could come right to surface if it's dipping easterly. We haven't drilled to the west, like on this section. Maybe you could show that, Neil. But you know, I do think it has to have the dikes. The mineralizing dikes have to be cutting the conglomerate. You know, there's no use just following the conglomerate itself. We have to establish where those dikes are going, I would say, the mineralizers. And maybe they're emanating from, you know, your hot core. And everybody wants to find that, you know, that mother lode down there, and maybe it does exist. But, you know, let's follow it down, because the best stuff to mine is the highest grade nearest surface, and we want to outline that. So, yeah, we want to go up there. Yeah, that's show that area up dip on you know, where the conglomerate would be up over there somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if there's still dikes out that way, you know, whether they're east-west trending parallel to the section, or whether they're going in and out of the section north-south, or both, you know, maybe that's going to be a good grade there. And if it's close to surface, you know, that's great.
Well, when we
so you have a slab like this.
Positive indications from hole 16, we're down deep, well within the phyllic zone. We hit some very nicely mineralized dikes, but those are intruding much finer grained rocks, right? And maybe not disseminating or dropping out as much copper marginal to those. So there's lower porosity. There's still a very nice correlation along that shoulder. So it bodes well for testing that, for sure.
So
And
how far off that section are was that hole? Where is that hole?
that's about 150 meters north of, actually a little bit closer. It's about 80 meters north of that section,
Okay.
where the
So
correlation still holds. And we see dikes that are mineralized all throughout this. We see them down very deep. We see them cutting the conglomerate. We see them cutting the finer grained siltstones and sandstones. We see them cutting the Babian porphyry stock themselves. There's a couple different generations of them, or at least different compositions of them. But what they have in common is they all carry copper. And some of them carry quite a bit of copper and gold, which is, excellent to see.
So
great. Yeah.
the whole
So we'll get
the
to
hole's
that
drill,
on the relog. Yeah.
so the hole's drill currently is just focusing on one part of it, but you can step up closer to surface. So in the drilling that's going to be done preliminarily 10K meters, how much will you be able to define in this upward direction that tracks closer to surface, and how much will you be able to drill in the connecting north to south?
Well, I don't think we'll be able to answer, how far it'll come to surface, especially out to the west, until we drill it. We definitely see potential there, but if it depends on the conglomerate, if it depends on the proximity to diking, we know it's in a really favorable geophysical zone. We know it's likely within that marginal high chargeability to low chargeability, which correlates to our potassic alteration within those bounding host rocks, the porphyry stock. So there's a high likelihood that it extends to surface, but I wouldn't want to say anything with certainty now, because we simply don't have that answer until we drill it. As for extending to the north and south, we see some pretty high grade, what are looking like right now, corridor zones with very, very strong mineralization around these conglomerates, where we see these conglomerate packages thicken. And so right now, because we see some very thick conglomerate packages in the north, some thick conglomerate packages in the south, and have zero information on what lies in between, we see that positive geophysical signature. I'd say there's a very good likelihood that we connect these zones, or at least find some more decently high grade corridors within that. And it's just like Charlie said, it's going to, the answer is going to come from systematically testing it.
So what's the distance between the north and the south, and how many holes would you try to kind of commit to connecting the two in this coming program?
From the north end of what we drilled in the south zone to the south end of what we drilled in the north zone is about 500 meters. From the bottom of the south zone to the top of the north zone, we're looking at closer to 800 meters, historically defined. And there's been very little deep testing off to the west of the north zone. A little bit by us in hole 12, which was a fantastic hole, but nothing done historically. So yeah, there's quite a bit of strike length to extend just along that southwestern margin of the intrusive stock. And this is, again, something that, we, like Charlie said, you don't want to be trying to figure out your geology by just wildcatting holes. So it's good to stick with what you have. And what we have right now is a very sizable volume of very nicely mineralized rock that comes to surface. And there's some very positive indications around the rest of the completely untested margin of the porphyry stock, where we see our best grade in what we've drilled so far remain open. So yeah, there's some good systematic work to do next year. There's also going to be some boulder step outs done next year, but I think the responsible exploration thing to do is explore this systematically and justify doing those big step out holes by showing that you've got something that stands on its own, which I think this north and south zone is rapidly shaping up to look like.
I get, one way you could do it, Gorm, is say, okay, there's that gap of 500 meters. Let's put 3 fences of holes. Let's presume the conglomerate trends northerly, dips easterly. So maybe we want to and presume that the dikes are steep and trending northerly. Let's put a fence of 3 to 4 holes on each section and drill 3 sections in between in that gap, and that systematically covers that. So fences are, inclined holes that are parallel to one another that cross that geology at a good angle. So give you a pretty good idea of how to link things from hole to hole and then from section to section. And say you did 4 of those on each section and they were, I don't know, inclined holes. So maybe 800-meter holes each. That's, 4 times 8 is 3,200 on each section and 3 of those sections. So there's 10,000 meters. And that's maybe a little more than we drilled in the previous 2 years. But we'd probably like to do double of that. So, if you wanted to carry those, if that worked out, fine. And if you wanted to carry those a little bit farther north and south, you quickly add up holes. We want to drill lots. That's how to figure out this deposit is with drilling. You're not going to get it from more surface geology because it's just not there. So if you want to do a bunch of wildcat holes, we want to have 2 drills and drill 20,000 meters, ideally, we would like to bring in some more cash to do that. We don't have quite enough to do that. We could do easily another program like we did last year. I'm sure Tony's told you that, but as a geologist, more rock, the better.
Absolutely.
So if you have the time and the capital, which hopefully you will, I think you will, to do some more bolder ideas, to do some wildcat holes, what would those be? Maybe it's too early to say, but what's some of the initial ideas floating around of being interesting to be a bit more bold?
I'll let Neil deal with this mainly, but you could look at the symmetry, say in this diagram that in this section that Neil shows, and maybe where hole 9 is out to the east there, maybe it's just as simple as that good stuff on the west is mirrored by good stuff on the east, and maybe there is that symmetry that you alluded to in terms of does the conglomerate wrap around the stalk or something like that. I mean, we really don't know that. But there's certainly other geophysical targets on the property that look good. I mean, this one that we've been chasing is some more subtle detail in the mag signature that trends north, and more subtle chargeability that was also imaged at depth by a reprocessed old ZTEM survey. So there's some geophysical techniques that we could still do. Maybe when we do more of our geophysics this year. We'll see some things to chase, and perhaps we look again at the soil geochemistry that's done, and there were some nice anomalies that Neil was pointing out in a discussion that Tony and myself and Neil had late last year, where hey, this geochemical stuff on the higher country hasn't really been followed up. It was kind of out toward hole 9, I think. So there's things like that that we could chase out, and I'm sure Neil has more ideas than I have because he's looked at it in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I mean, broadly, that's right. This hole 9 was a very, very positive. It was the one really bold step out we did last year, and we hit very encouraging copper. It was anomalous right up until the intrusive stock. Where we were in the intrusive stock, we're still seeing copper veining. And yeah, it's following up that, once we refine the IP survey to target it a little bit finer, still a coarse tool, but it's going to help guide us a little bit. Like, we're still playing with, 200 meters distance to get the right zone out there potentially. So following up hole 9 is going to be obviously on the to-do list, but further
I'm
going
to put up my hand here right now, sorry, and interrupt you and say, why don't you tell us a little bit about why was that hole drilled? I mean, it's actually not in the clear-cut logging access place. So, what was the rationale behind that? And I actually, to be honest with you, I actually kind of forget what it was. I know it was partly driven by your interactions with our partner Teck, right? That's part of it.
Yeah. So Teck, was very encouraged by the the concentric nature of the chargeability anomaly, right?
Right.
A lot of porphyry deposits in the region have a really nice phyllic halo, but there's a lot of faulting. There's like block faulting that have dropped one side of it down over time, considerable distance. And so that anomaly just stops, right? And so you've got a nice little fault-bound deposit. We don't seem to have that here. We have maybe a linear that is maybe responsible, a fault, an older fault responsible for driving the emplacement of the intrusion, but we don't really see the later stage faulting offsetting anything. So given that that area was completely untested and within that same geophysical signature, it stood to reason that if this IP anomaly was associated with the porphyry mineralization, that drilling in that area should have some copper in it. It should be pretty anomalous in copper, or a really good hole. And it was pretty close to a really good hole. We hit 0.4 copper equivalent right off the surface with really decent gold and molybdenum as well. And it was very strongly anomalous in copper, up over 0.1 to 0.2% copper all the way down until the intrusive stock, and just very consistent. And the host rocks were unknown. There was no information from historical drilling because it was 500 meters away from any historical hole, and it's more than a kilometer away from the nearest outcrop that was mapped. And it turns out it's very similar host rock to what's on the west side. It's not as rounded a conglomerate. It's finer grained and a bit more angular, but it is still very much a fragmental rock that is porous. And so we have a lot of really good indication now that following up that and maybe stepping a little bit further away from the intrusive stock, which seems to be our sweet spot out to the west, would yield some really positive results. And this is very good for confirming the prospectivity of elsewhere around this donut, because there's very little testing. The only historical hole that was drilled that was outside the porphyry stock hit very strongly anomalous copper, up to 0.3% over sizable intervals. And so there's very good indications over a kilometer away to the north.
Can you turn on the holes, the historical holes?
Yeah,
there?
sorry, I'll take off the mag there so you can see the holes a little bit better. But this historical hole, this is the only historical hole that was drilled outside the porphyry intrusion, and it hit some pretty encouraging grade. A lot of greens and reds and oranges in there right the way down.
And that's hole 9, the trace you can see there too. Is it?
This is hole
Right
9,
there.
the trace, which hit very encouraging results off, from surface. So there's easily enough room to fit a whole nother north and south zone along this southern margin, along this western margin, and up to the north where it's completely untested as well. So, thankfully, it's a very well positioned land package relative to what we infer to be the driving source of mineralization, that porphyry stock. So, it's still a big land package to explore, but as far as wildcatting goes, I think we'll have pretty decent chances of success. But again, it's a very expensive endeavor. It's every hole you drill down to a kilometer deep is hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so you want to make sure that you're spending that wisely. And so I think as far as wildcatting goes, it's going to be more of the same, maybe step out a little bit further, but still stick close to what has yielded positive results, because that gives you the best chance. In a porphyry system like this, copper and gold is a very good vector for copper and gold, and we've hit that in hole 9. And so it would be maybe more broad step outs, but still somewhat systematically from hole 9 to explore that. And that's going to give us the best chances of success.
Great.
Excellent. I think we should probably conclude there. That's a very good overview of the kind of the logical easy things to do, or easy things, but you have a good game plan for the first 10K, and then you can try to hug around the whole 9 and and see if you can duplicate the same thing again, essentially.
Yeah.
You're relatively undervalued to the peers, of course. I mean, I think that's a fair statement, to be honest. What is the question? What's the market waiting for? Is there a question they want to have answered, or is it just not? Is it just lack of awareness, simply?
We're trading at almost 52-week highs. I think a lot of it is trading. It's we got resistance. I think a lot of it's mental. It's where we came from as opposed to where we are. It's looking at comps. There are no comps in the area. If you look at the other non-GT Golden Triangle comps, like all those guys are worth now less than us. So they look at us. Maybe we're worth more than ours. So we're fairly valued. But first of all, any of those other comps they have, I'm not going to name names, throw anyone under the bus. They started with great drill holes, and they didn't follow up with great drill holes. We start up with a great drill hole and follow up with even better drill holes. And our region's a lot different than, where we're drilling is a lot different than pretty much any other property in BC. I'm sure people have questions. They want us to drill again. But what I always tell people right now, it's about entry point. If you want your questions answered, that's going to cost you a pound of flesh. That's going to be a different valuation. So, would you rather invest us worth 45 million and we haven't answered those questions, or would you rather us answer 2 more questions and be worth 150 million? Would you be more, secure about your money? So I think that's a lot of questions people have. When you look at big companies, I worked at one, like big company would rather buy you for 500 million to $1 billion as opposed to 50 million when there is a lot of uncertainty. I think when you pass certain thresholds, like 50 million, $100 million market cap, certain funds are allowed to invest in you. So that changes the game a lot because they're kind of these banks, and the funds, they act within a box. They don't invest with companies that are worth less than a certain market cap. Like, for example, I know Sprott's like that. The other thing, the higher value you go, the more these funds and the banks and people can trade it. So the more that volume turns into, value of volume. So I was talking to a family office the other day, and they said, we'd rather invest in you when you're $1. So when those shares trading, we can get in or out. Because right now I can't put $2 million into your company, but maybe when you're $1, these other funds come in, they create more liquidity, and I can get into that dollar stock and invest $2 million in, because right now those companies can't. So I said, why don't you just put that $2 million in now and send the stock to 55 cents, as opposed to when we're $1, you can get it in at $1, but you're still paying 100% more. But a lot of these family offices and funds don't really think logically. I'm just telling a lot of the different things that I'm hearing. So then in terms of drilling, like, look, the two big things we're going to unlock here is drilling north of 17 along that shoulder to prove that shoulder works. If we do that again, like, just wow. And the other thing is drilling in a better location towards east. And if we can hit some high grade and other great results east, where we hit 2309, all of a sudden you can start connecting that what do you call that? What do you call those things they throw in Australia? The
Frisbee, no?
Now it looks like a frisbee. And then the next step is, like, let's go northeast and see if we can create this into an inner tube, into a circle. So, a lot of those questions, how much do they cost? 50 million, 100 million, $1 billion. So the question is, what's your entry point? How many questions and how much you need this thing to get de-risked? But I think so far it's about progression. We've just got better. We've done the shareholders right by doing those deals with Teck. We look after our cap structure. We put as much money that we have into the ground, and we're in BC. So what else are you looking for?
And this might be a bit of a repeat, but there might be some permutations of how this kind of happens. So if you decide to go with 10K initially, I mean, you could decide to just go to announce 20K of drilling up front if you get the funds for it. But if you decide to go with 10K first, what do you think could take place between you starting for you to maybe revise that, to change that, sort of scope of the drilling that you will do this year?
What do you mean, changing from 10K to 20K?
Exactly, or possibly more.
I think we
probably sourcing funds.
20. I think we'll probably stick with the 20, unless there's, a complete re-rate and our cost of capital is a lot lower. I think the plan right now is to go 20K and do 2 rigs. And you start with 1 rig, for the first couple of weeks, and you bring a second one out there and you drill until November. So that's kind of the plan we're doing right now. We're going to have the cash to get there with the warrants and everything else. So I'm not really worried about having the money for the 20K and doing it. And I think like probably 85% chance we do it with the 2 rigs at once. But there's a small, I think the only question is, do we do the 20K with 20,000 with 2 rigs or 1 rig? So it's how much of the story do people want to know right away versus how much do they want news coming on all the way throughout the year? I think that's kind of the big question. We have access to the rigs. I've already talked to the drillers. Those drills are available. We're going to go to tender very soon, but did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, Teck owns just below 20%, and it's kind of the thing is, I take it's difficult for them to increase that position further for accounting reasons and stuff like this.
They can maintain their position if we like dilute. So if another company comes in or we do a raise, like they're allowed to maintain it. But yeah, so like if they go over 19.9, they have to have a special vote or they have to like put an official bid on us. And like I said before, like their big constraint isn't capital or cash. They have plenty of it. It's more their people. So they'd rather us be doing the work, us de-risking it until a point that, they can buy it and start kind of moving it forward. So, but if you look at it from Teck's point of view, like this could very well displace some of those other kind of growth projects they have in BC, like a Shafts Creek or a Galore Creek. Like those are world-class projects, but they cost like $12-16 billion to build. So that's a big question mark, and that's a lot of the supply. So if, the big thing for us is the infrastructure, the grade, and the scale. So if you look at our infrastructure, that like takes the capital, cuts it almost in half. So could NAC get to that size where, we're 6 billion tons and we displace that supply from Galore or Shafts Creek and it costs half to build? Like that's kind of something that people should start be keeping in the back of their mind, something that we're trying to get towards. But the same reason I'm not focused on getting to $500 million overnight. I'm not focused on getting to 6 billion tons. I think the near term focus is get to, a billion tons of ore. And of that, 10 to 20% of that really high grade. And then from that, you use as a foundation, you build out.
Kind of the point being, in the next leg of funds that you will require to move this beyond this program, you will need that capital from a source that's not Teck, probably. That's kind of the point being. And you might be able to get it from a strategic, or it's going to be a standard equity raise. What's your thinking on this?
These porphyries, like everyone thinks it's really expensive to drill out, but they're not. Like, GT Gold drilled 21 drill holes and sold their companies for $400 million. Like once you start showing the continuity and the scale and how they can extend, like you could do wider drill holes if you kind of know how the trend is going. So it's not going to cost that much capital really. And like, let me break it down for you. Let's say Eric Sprott, for example, he loves us. And let's say we're worth $100 million at one point. And Eric Sprott comes in there, and that's a guy I would let invest in us because I call that dilution but not dilution, and an investor that gives you an uplift in your stock credibility. So let's say Eric Sprott comes in there and we're worth $100 million, and he says, I want to own 10% of your company. So he gives us $10 million. We do it with no warrants, but he's like, you guys are going to sell for $500 million down the road. I'll do it with no warrants to get a 5X. So he gives us $10 million. Well, that $10 million isn't just $10 million. It's actually around $20 million plus. So with that $10 million, what you have is you have about a 61%, delta increase from your flow through. So that 10 million gives you 16 million. Plus you get that, hopefully Teck would be like, well, I want to maintain my 19.9. So a 19.9 means they give a 20% bonus. So you pretty much get to that 20 million by just getting a 10 million investment. So every dollar that you get invested that you put towards flow through means $2 in the ground if it also comes with a Teck matching. So it doesn't actually come with that much dilution to get another $20 million, which will bring you through another 2 programs. But I don't want to be here forever. I want to kind of do the most efficient program as possible, uncover a lot of the blue sky and then let someone else do it. And then get to as high a valuation as possible.
That kind of answers the final question in a sense, but I'll ask it anyway. So where do you want to see American Eagle in 3 years from now?
We either have it at a lot higher valuation or, God willing, someone comes out and takes it kind of to that next stage, to that development stage. I worked for a mining company whose job was to build mines, and it was very difficult for them to do it. And that's not a shot at the company. It's difficult for a lot of mining companies to build mines properly. That's the hardest part of the game. That's where your upfront capital goes, and it kills companies. So I'm not going to pretend that I know how to build a mine, but I want to partner with companies that can, to create that light out of the tunnel, to eventually create that liquidity event and kind of take that baton and move this property to the next level. So we're not going to be a builder. We're explorers. We have really good exploration geologists. How long it takes to get there, is just kind of based on value and based on our drilling, etc. So I'm not going to say we're going to sell this in 2 years. I'm also not going to say we're not.